Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio channel. Tonight we step off the boat with you into a city that seems to breathe smoke, steam, and hunger all at once. The harbour rocks behind you, dark water slapping wood, while ahead the shoreline rises in a jagged blur of masts, chimneys, church spires, and crowded roofs. You can smell tar, salt, damp rope, horse sweat, and something frying in old grease nearby. Men shout in accents you almost know and cannot quite place. Children dart between trunks and boots like alley cats with better luck. Everything feels busy, impatient, slightly suspicious, and yet this is the place people whispered about across oceans and dinner tables, the place where money could be earned, bread might be steady, and your family might not always be one bad harvest away from ruin. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what your local time is. Now, dim the lights, and you step forward with your family into New York in 1860 carrying bundles, names, prayers, and the cautious hope that all this noise can somehow become home. The first thing you notice is that the city does not greet you gently. It grabs. Wheels rattle over uneven stones. Drays creak under barrels and crates. Dock workers call to one another through a storm of gull cries. Somewhere close, a bell rings. Then another answers from farther inland. You tighten your fingers around a cloth bag that holds nearly everything worth keeping: a spare shirt, a cooking spoon, a ribbon from home, a little loaf gone stale at the edges. Beside you. Your family tries not to stare, though everyone stares anyway. Lower Manhattan is already thick with people by 1860. Ships pour newcomers into the city, and the streets around the waterfront seem to have no room left for fresh feet. Irish families, Germans, and migrants from the countryside all jostle in the same spaces. You hear English spoken fast and flat, but also words from Cork, Bavaria, Naples, and places nobody at the dock bothers to identify properly. A sharp-faced clerk may reduce every difference into one lazy shrug. Foreigners, that saves him effort. You walk north from the harbour, following advice that arrived folded inside rumour. There are cheap rooms on the east side, someone said. There is work near the docks, another promised. A cousin of a neighbour once stayed near Mulberry Bend, which sounds reassuring until you realise that in New York, directions are sometimes built from desperation rather than maps. You pass storefronts with signs painted in peeling letters. You pass cellar doors open to darkness. You pass women leaning from windows to shake crumbs from cloths, and the crumbs drift down into the street with ash, cinders, and dust. The road feels hard even through worn soles. Mud sits in the gaps between stones, blackened by manure and chimney soot. Horses snort clouds into the cool air. A peddler pushes past with tin cups clanging together. Somewhere onions are frying, somewhere else cabbage boils. The smells do not line up politely, they collide. Fish, coal smoke, stale beer, wet wool, sewage, soap, and bread all seem to rise at once. As if the city were cooking every meal in one enormous pot and forgetting to wash it. Your family is not alone in this march toward uncertainty. Plenty of immigrant households enter New York with little more than luggage and contacts scribbled on scraps of paper. Historians know that chain migration mattered deeply. One brother came first, then sent word. A widow followed cousins. A family from one village ended up sharing a single block because one person had managed to survive there long enough to wave in the next. The city expanded not only through grand plans, but through whispered directions and borrowed confidence. At a busy corner you pause. And that is when the buildings begin to tell you what kind of a life might await. Narrow lots, tall walls, windows set close together. Some houses were once built for one family and then cut and recut indoors until every floor held more bodies than it was meant to bear. Others were raised quickly for profit because landlords understood a simple truth. Poor people need shelter tonight, even if the shelter is mean, damp, and crowded. Especially then. A man offers to carry your trunk for a coin you cannot spare. A boy no older than 10 offers to guide you for half that. His face is smudged, his cap too large, his expression already old. You refuse them both, gently at first. In New York, gentleness may be admired, but it does not always win. Your refusal becomes firmer. The boy shrugs and vanishes into the moving crowd. He has heard no plenty of times. The city feels vertical. That is part of its strangeness. At home, whatever home was, the sky likely had more authority. Here, brick rises on either side of you. Laundry hangs above the street like surrender flags. Faces appear in windows, then disappear. A woman empties a basin into the gutter without warning, and the dirty water snakes past your shoes. Nobody apologizes. There are too many people to apologize to. For immigrant families, arrival in New York often meant entering neighborhoods where poverty was ordinary rather than exceptional. This was not hidden poverty tucked discreetly behind respectable facades. It lived on stoops, in alleys, at pump handles, by pawn shops and bakeries. The city did have elegance uptown, of course. Fine houses stood not impossibly far away, but distance in New York is measured not only in blocks, it is measured in access, language, employment, and whether the world expects you to matter. You can be a short walk from wealth and still live in another universe. You notice children everywhere. That surprises you. A grand city might have seemed a place of stern adults, but New York in these crowded districts hums with children. They carry coal scuttles, mind babies, sell matches, drag hoops, and dodge wagons with the quick judgment of street birds. One little girl holds a loaf under her arm with the seriousness of a bank clerk guarding ledgers. Another child licks molasses from his thumb while squinting at your bundles, as if guessing whether you have come poor enough to belong. The buildings grow meaner as you go. Their brick is stained. Their doors gape. Stairs inside look tired before you even climb them. A hallway might smell of damp wood and old cooking. The plaster peels in strips. A baby cries somewhere above. Then another voice begins singing to hush it. The song is not in English. It drifts down the stairwell warm and low, carrying a fragment of home for somebody. There is a strange comfort in that. Even in the crush, traces of old world survive. A shop window displays black bread beside American pies. A cobbler speaks in German while hammering soles. A woman crosses herself quickly at the sight of a church. Someone has pinned dried herbs near a doorway, perhaps for scent, perhaps for memory, perhaps because old habits cling longer than coats. One quirky detail scholars sometimes note about these neighborhoods is how people brought superstitions with them as carefully as they brought blankets. A horseshoe over a rented door, garlic in the room, a charm tucked into bedding, in a city of landlords, disease, and strangers. Luck deserves all available assistance. You turn into a narrower street. Here the light changes. Sun reaches down only in strips, touching window glass and puddles, then retreating. The sound changes too. The open clang of the waterfront becomes a closer music. Pot lids, arguing voices, a handcart squealing, a fiddle somewhere indoors, boots on wooden stairs, a baby coughing, somebody laughing too hard at a joke that probably should not be funny. The air feels warmer, trapped between walls. When you brush a hand along brick, it is rough, dusty, and faintly damp in the shade. This is the quarter where the cheapest rooms can often be found. Cheap is a dangerous word. It sounds like mercy. It often means sacrifice. Rent in these districts still eats at wages, and what you can afford may barely deserve the name home. Yet for newcomers, the immediate problem is not dignity, it is enclosure. 4 walls, a place to keep children from sleeping under open sky. A corner where your possessions are at least your own until hunger says otherwise. A landlady appears as if summoned by need itself. She stands at a doorway with folded arms, measuring your family in one swift look. She sees your clothes, your number, your bundles, the fatigue in your shoulders. She does arithmetic with her eyes. How many can pay? How many will fall behind? How much noise the children may make? Whether you are likely to complain. Her apron is clean enough to suggest discipline rather than comfort. When she speaks, the price comes fast. You follow her inside. The entry smells of cabbage, damp wool, old smoke, and something sour hidden in the boards. The stair rail is sticky from many hands. Light seeps through a rear opening and lands weakly on worn steps. You climb. The wood complains beneath every footfall. On one landing, a door stands open, and you glimpse a room where a bed, a table, and a stove seem to be arguing over the same small patch of floor. A man sits mending harness by the window. A woman rocks a child with her foot while peeling potatoes. Another child sleeps under the table as if that were the most natural bed in the world. That sight tells you more than the landlady ever will. By 1860, overcrowding in New York tenements had become a defining feature of immigrant life in many poor neighborhoods. Families often took in boarders to help cover rent. Rooms served several purposes at once, turning from kitchen to bedroom to workshop in the span of a day. Privacy became a luxury nearly as rare as fresh air. Historians still dispute exactly how representative the worst examples were in every ward. Because records catch some streets more clearly than others, and reformers sometimes highlighted the most dreadful cases to stir action. Even so, nobody doubts the core truth. Too many people were packed into buildings built for profit, not health. The landlady opens a door and lets you look. The room is small enough that your first breath feels too large for it. One window, cloudy with grime. A stove blackened by many meals. Walls the colour of old bone. Floorboards with gaps wide enough to trap crumbs and perhaps whole hopes. When you stand still, you hear the lives around you through the walls. A cough, a chair scrape, murmured prayer, water sloshing in a pail, a baby fussing, then hiccuping into silence. The room is not empty exactly. It is crowded with the evidence of other tenants who have passed through and left nothing but wear. Still, your family steps in. You touch the sill. Dust coats your fingertips. The air near the window is cold, but the centre of the room holds yesterday's cooking and the faint heat of trapped breath. You imagine bedding rolled in one corner, shoes lined near the stove, a kettle, maybe a crate turned into a stool, maybe a nail in the wall for the good shawl. The room does not offer comfort, but it offers shape. After a voyage, after stations of waiting, shape can feel close to mercy. Outside the window, another wall rises. Laundry flaps between buildings. A woman calls down to someone in the yard. Her voice has the round vowels of Ireland. Below, a man curses in German at a cartwheel that will not obey him. This mixture is another lesson of New York. Immigrant families do not arrive into neat little storybook districts where everyone comes from one village and bakes identical bread. They arrive into a jumble. Sometimes one nationality dominates a street or block, but the city always leaks one people into another. Your children, or the children beside you if you imagine yourself small again. Begin to inspect the room in the practical way children do. They test the floor with their feet. They peer into corners. One presses a palm to the stove. Another asks where everyone will sleep. A fair question. No elegant answer appears. Sleep will go wherever sleep can fit. Parents by the wall, children crosswise, perhaps a boarder later, if need turns sharp enough. Bodies become furniture in such rooms. You arrange yourselves like luggage and call it night. Yet amid the strain there is a pulse of relief. You have reached a door that closes, however badly, however thinly. Out on the street, New York demanded explanation from every glance. In here, for one evening at least, your family can lower its bundles to the floor. The muscles in your back begin to confess their pain. Your shoes feel damp. Your throat tastes of soot and salt. When someone opens a packet of bread or cheese saved from the journey, even that plain food smells rich enough to quiet the room. Soon dusk thickens outside. The noises in the building do not fade so much as change shape. Day labourers return, pans knock together, infants wake. Someone nearby starts a tune on a fiddle, not beautifully, but with feeling. Footsteps clatter up and down the stairs. From the street comes the rumble of wheels and the bark of a vendor still trying his luck. Candlelight flickers across the wall, making the plaster seem almost warm. You sit with your family in the half-light and understand something important. America has not opened like a wide meadow. It has opened like a stairwell, narrow, loud, crowded, smelling of coal and supper and strangers. But it has opened. That is enough for tonight. Perhaps you think of the old place then. Not grandly, not with violins in the air, You think of a field after rain, or a lane at evening, or the particular creak of a door you knew well enough to ignore. Memory does not always choose the noble image. Sometimes it gives you the smell of rye bread, the feel of a familiar bench, the way light sat on one wall in winter. In this room, memory pricks, but it also steadies. You came from somewhere real. That matters. It keeps the city from swallowing your name whole. The room darkens further. Breath warms it. Cloth rustles. A child leans against your side and grows heavy with sleep. You hear another family on the floor below settling into their own arrangements. A cough, a prayer, a whispered argument about money. Then quiet, or the nearest thing this building can manage. You lie down at last on bedding spread over boards that press every knot of wood into your bones. The air is close, the pillow thin, the night alive with creaks and distant wheels. Yet exhaustion is its own blanket. Your eyes close while the city still mutters outside, while ships in the harbour rock under moonlight, while 10,000 other newcomers count their coins and wonder what tomorrow may demand. In the darkness, New York feels enormous, indifferent, and oddly intimate. You have entered it not through monuments or speeches, but through a rented room and a tired staircase. That is how many immigrant families began. Not with triumph, with cramped air, aching legs, and the stubborn decision to keep going when turning back was impossible. Sleep comes slowly, carrying soot, fear, and a little hope with it. Morning arrives without ceremony. No golden hush, no gentle bird song outside a cottage window, none of the sentimental tricks memory likes to play. In a New York tenement in 1860, dawn enters as noise first. Boots knock the stair, a child cries through the wall. Someone drags a chair across bare boards overhead with a scrape like an irritated violin. From the street below comes the clatter of wheels, the sharp call of a peddler, and the impatient snort of horses already put to work. You wake because the whole building wakes, and because sleeping late is for people who have enough space to dream properly. The room feels smaller by daylight. That is the first true shock. Night can be merciful. Shadows blur the boundaries and let imagination pad the corners. Morning removes the kindness. The walls are close, the ceiling low, the floor uneven. Whatever number of people sleeps here, the room insists there should have been fewer. Your bedding is rolled or folded as soon as possible, because a bed left spread across the board steals half the useful space. In a tenement apartment, objects are never merely objects. They are rivals for the same inches of air. You stand and feel yesterday in your joints. The floor is cool under your feet, rough in places, gritty in others. Dust gathers where the broom cannot quite win. One child still rubs sleep from swollen eyes. Another sits cross-legged and stares toward the window. Not at the view exactly, but at the square of light it throws. The stove waits in the corner like a stern little machine that can offer warmth, hot tea, and supper if you feed it fuel, which of course costs money. Everything in the room has that condition attached. It will help you for a price. This apartment is not really an apartment in the modern, generous sense. It is a room, perhaps two if fortune has smiled in a crooked way. By 1860, many New York tenements had been carved out of older houses once meant for a single family, then divided again and again as landlords chased rent from every possible corner. In the newer purpose, built tenements, the rooms were often planned with profit more carefully than comfort. Narrow lots encouraged narrow solutions. A front room might take what street light it could, while an inner room sat dim and stale, borrowing air from the door or not at all. Historians still disagree about how quickly the worst design spread before reform became louder, but nobody seriously doubts that cramped, poorly ventilated rooms shaped daily life for thousands. You begin to understand that home here is a choreography of shifting things. Bedding disappears into bundles. A crate becomes a seat. A chest becomes a table. A windowsill becomes storage. Clothing hangs from nails driven into plaster. Perhaps a shawl is pinned to divide one corner from another, creating a pretend chamber where there is no real privacy. Pretend privacy matters. It gives shape to dignity. A mother nursing a baby behind a hanging cloth may know every sound still passes through, yet the gesture itself says something fierce. This family remains a family. It has not become public property. Light reaches the room unevenly. Near the single window, you can inspect a shirt for mending or pick stones from lentils. 2 steps away, the air thickens into shadow. The glass itself is often filmed with soot and city grime. You rub a patch clear with a sleeve, and the view does not reward you with beauty. Another wall stands close by, another row of windows, another line of laundry stiffening in the morning air. Yet the window remains precious. It is your bargain with the outside world. Through it come light, gossip, weather, and the news that dinner may burn if you stare too long. It is easy to imagine immigrant families living in one steady arrangement, but the truth is more restless. The room changes function by the hour. At dawn it is a dormitory being erased. By breakfast it becomes a kitchen if there is food to cook. Soon after, perhaps it is a workshop. A woman might sew shirts for a contractor. A man may mend boots or make cigars by hand if work has entered the home. Children shell peas, win thread, sort rags, or simply try not to get stepped on. By evening the room returns to being a dining place and then a sleeping place again. One patch of boards must carry every purpose. No wonder it looks tired. Smell governs the space more than sight. You notice this slowly because smell does not knock. It settles. Coal smoke, if you can afford coal. Wood smoke if scraps are burned. Fried onions, cabbage, boiling potatoes, stale beer, damp bedding, lye soap, wet wool, leather, old dust, and the faint sour note of too many bodies breathing one shared air. On washing day, the room may briefly smell almost clean, though even cleanliness here has a sharp, hard-working scent. Soap, steam, wet cloth. Hot metal, clean is never delicate, clean is labour. There is little softness in the furnishings. A table may be scarred and wobbling. Chairs may not match or may not exist in sufficient number. The bedstead, if there is one, can be shared by several, while others sleep on pallets, straw ticks, or blankets on the floor. Straw mattresses flatten quickly and develop opinions about your spine. Blankets smell of use, and sometimes of the family who owned them first. A trunk under the bed can hold the better clothes, the family papers, a prayer book, a lock of hair tied in ribbon, perhaps a little tin box with coins hidden beneath folded linen. That box is watched with the seriousness of a crown jewel. Sometimes there is a border. That changes everything. A border brings cash, or at least the promise of cash, which can mean rent paid, fuel bought, food stretched less desperately. He also brings another pair of boots by the door, another body in the air, another voice at night, another complication in the room's fragile geometry. Families often accepted the bargain because they had to. A single male labourer might sleep in the same room as parents and children. His presence tolerated because hunger is worse than awkwardness. Respectability bends under rent pressure. It does not always break, but it learns some painful new angles. You notice sound differently indoors. In the street, noise scatters. Inside a tenement, it layers. Through the wall to your left, a couple debates money in quick whispers that are not nearly quiet enough. Above you, a child runs 3 steps, stops, then runs 3 more. Somewhere down the hall, a baby has the flat, relentless cry of a creature whose grievance is absolute. Pots knock. Someone coughs from deep in the chest. Someone laughs hard enough to make the floor answer. Privacy, again, is mostly an idea. The building hears you all. In return, you hear the building think. The walls themselves tell stories. Plaster cracks wander from corner to corner like little maps of surrender. Smoke darkens the ceiling above the stove. Around the window frame, damp may leave a pale bloom or soft patch. In winter, the room can be bitter near the glass and stifling beside the stove. In summer, heat sits inside it like a tenant who refuses to pay and refuses to leave. Air does not move kindly through these buildings. If the yard below is narrow and the windows face brick, the room can hold warmth and odour with surprising loyalty. One curious detail from accounts of crowded urban housing is how families sometimes personalised miserable rooms with intense care. A print of a saint or political hero might be pinned to the wall. A bit of ribbon could brighten a shelf. A cracked cup might be kept because it came from home. Potted plants occasionally appeared on windowsills even where sunlight was a joke. Imagine the optimism. a geranium trying to survive above a lane full of mud, ash, and donkey carts. That plant is either foolish or heroic, perhaps both. New Yorkers are often both. Children learn the apartment's rules faster than adults. Do not kick the bucket, do not touch the stove, do not block the door, do not lean too hard against that chair. Keep the good shawl away from soot. Do not wake the baby unless the baby clearly intends to wake everyone anyway. A small child can turn the single room into a maze of danger in seconds. So older siblings become assistant managers of chaos. They lift, hush, distract, and fetch. Childhood in a tenement has fewer corners for idleness. Meals reveal the room's logic. There is no grand dining area. Food is prepared where it can be, and eaten where people can fit themselves. A pot set on the stove sends out a rich cloud of steam, and suddenly the whole room is kitchen. The smell of onions or broth makes the walls feel closer, but also kinder. Bread is cut on the table if there is table space. If not, it is cut on a board across two knees. Cups are shared, washed, and shared again. A spoon dropped to the floor is retrieved quickly because there are only so many spoons in the universe. And this room owns perhaps 3. You also learn what the apartment cannot do. It cannot hide grief well. A family receiving bad news must bear it within earshot of neighbours. It cannot hide illness well. One person's fever changes the weather for everyone. It cannot hide marital strain, nor the embarrassment of unpaid rent, nor the rough cough that may mean mere cold or something much darker. Historians have long argued over exactly how families preserved emotional privacy in such close quarters. Some suggest silence became a practiced skill. Others note how humour, ritual, and routine gave people a way to endure exposure. Perhaps both are true. You joke about the draft, fold the shirts, stir the soup, and continue being observed by 3 walls and several households. At times the room feels almost ship-like. That comparison comes easily to many newcomers. You sleep close, store carefully, endure smells, and measure comfort in inches. The floor moves less than a deck, but the sense of being carried by forces beyond your control remains. Rent day, hiring day, weather, sickness, the temper of employers, the cost of coal, the luck of a child finding work or not finding trouble. All these currents run through the room even when nobody speaks of them. And yet, people make rituals here. That is the stubborn beauty of it. A mother folds aprons the same way her mother did. A father removes his cap and smooths his hair before sitting to supper, though the room is too tired to care. Children are scrubbed as well as circumstances allow before Sunday. Hair is braided. A prayer is said over bread. A saint's day, a name day, a birthday, or a feast from the old country may be honoured with one special dish if money loosens its grip for an hour. Ceremonies look smaller in cramped quarters, but they can feel larger because everyone is so near them. A blessing spoken in a tiny room fills it completely. The apartment is also where old identities and new pressures meet face to face. In one corner stands a trunk packed by village logic, with shawls, tools, and keepsakes chosen for life elsewhere. In another corner sits an American broom, an American pail, perhaps an American newspaper if anyone in the household can read enough English to wrestle it into meaning. You inhabit both worlds badly at first, then less badly. The room becomes a translation machine, turning old habits toward new necessities. By afternoon, the sunlight shifts and briefly catches the worn table edge, the kettle handle, the polished spot on the floor where many feet have turned. These tiny glints can make the place seem almost tender. Not pleasant exactly. Tender in the sense that your life has pressed into it. The room carries marks now because you are here. A shawl hangs from your nail. Your cup sits by the stove. Your child's shoe dries by the sill. The apartment remains cramped, flawed, and hungry for rent, but it has begun the slow work of memorizing your family. When evening comes, the entire process reverses. Tools or sewing are put away. Supper disappears into bellies as far as it can. The table is cleared, bedding comes out, shadows gather around the corners again, softening the insults of daylight, one by one. Voices in nearby rooms lower, though not all at once and not very far. Someone sings a lullaby in a tongue half the building does not understand. Someone else sneezes with operatic force. There is always one dramatic sneezer. History rarely records him, which feels unfair. You lie down at last within the tight order of your room. The wall is close enough to touch. The last warmth from the stove fades slowly. Through the window comes a weak stripe of moonlight, diluted by grime. From the hallway drifts the smell of extinguished lamps and damp wood. The apartment has asked much of you all day. Stand here, move that, share this. Breathe carefully, save fuel, guard possessions, make space where none exists. Still, it has held you. In 1860, for many immigrant families, that counted as the beginning of home. By the time you have lived even a short while in a New York tenement, you stop thinking of water as something that simply exists. It becomes a task, a schedule, a weight in the arms, a source of quarrels, and sometimes a small daily miracle. In 1860, clean water does not flow obediently from a private tap inside your room. It must be fetched, carried, guarded from waste, and stretched through the day with the kind of care usually reserved for coins. Morning begins with the pail. You hear it before you lift it. The soft tin knock against the floorboards, the hollow promise that whatever you do next will involve carrying, waiting, and trying not to spill. The hallway is already awake. Doors open and close. Feet move up and down the stair. Somewhere below, a woman calls to her daughter to hurry. Somewhere above, a child is being washed with the sort of protest usually heard from goats. The building has learned that people must reach the yard pump or shared source before the line grows absurd. You take the pail and step into the passage, where the air is cooler than the room but no cleaner. The stair rail feels smooth in some spots, tacky in others. A faint smell of damp wood rises from the lower floors. The building seems to perspire even in calm weather. On the landing, another tenant stands with 2 buckets and an expression that says the day has already asked too much. She nods, because there is no point pretending either of you is here for pleasure. The trip for water is not dramatic, which is exactly why it matters. Great events make history books feel important, but ordinary burdens shape a life more completely. You descend carefully, hearing the clank of metal, the scrape of shoes, the short cough of an old man in the room by the stairs. Outside, the yard or court between buildings may be little more than a cramped open pocket with uneven ground, scattered ash, and a pump that looks overworked and slightly offended. Around it gathers the building's whole democracy of need. There are women with rolled sleeves, older boys sent down on errands, little girls gripping pitchers with both hands, a boarder in shirt sleeves who wants water for shaving before work, and perhaps a mother balancing a baby on one hip while nudging a bucket with her foot. Language swirls at the pump just as it does in the street. Irish voices rise sharply. German consonants knock against one another. English from native-born New Yorkers comes quick and impatient. You can tell who slept badly by the way the handle is taken. The pump itself has a personality. All pumps do. This one groans, resists, and then yields in sudden spurts. The iron handle is cold in the morning, rough against the palm and heavier than it first appears. Water splashes into tin with a bright, practical sound that can feel almost cheerful, until someone reminds you there are several people waiting. If the flow is weak, tempers tighten. If the yard is muddy, skirts darken at the hem. If a child tips a bucket by accident, there may be tears, scolding, or merely the exhausted silence that says crying would cost too much energy. For families in poor neighbourhoods, water was always bound to labour. A few buildings had better arrangements than others, but many tenants depended on outdoor pumps or shared sources. Even where city water systems existed, access within cheap housing could be limited or unreliable. Historians still debate how evenly these services reached the most crowded districts by 1860, because infrastructure expanded unevenly, and landlords were not famous for their generosity. But the daily reality remains clear enough. Water inside the tenement economy had to be hauled. Once filled, the pail becomes heavier than your optimism. That is the second lesson. You carry it upstairs while trying not to splash half the morning onto the steps. The metal handle bites the fingers. Your shoulder tilts to compensate. A child trying to help often makes the burden sweeter and less efficient at the same time. The stair smells of stale cooking, lamp smoke, and damp plaster. By the time you reach your room, the water already feels partly spent because lifting it there has cost so much effort. Now the division begins. Some is for drinking. That portion is treated with respect. Some is for boiling tea or broth. Some is for washing faces, hands, and perhaps the smallest children. Some is for cooking beans, potatoes, or cabbage. Some may be saved in case a shirt needs scrubbing or a fevered brow needs cooling. Each use competes with the others. You learn quickly that cleanliness in a tenement is not merely a virtue, it is a strategy under rationing. A basin set on the table changes the room's mood. One by one, faces are washed. The water clouds after a few turns. Soap, if available, has its own hard smell, sharp and alkaline, like effort made visible. A child shivers when the cloth touches the neck. Another squeals when ears are scrubbed with special determination. Hands are inspected. Fingernails receive disapproving attention. By the end, the basin water has gone grey with dust, coal smudges, and the sticky residue of city living. Nobody looks surprised. Laundry is another campaign entirely. A day chosen for washing can transform the apartment into a little steam factory. Water must be heated, soap worked in, garments scrubbed, wrung, rinsed, and hung wherever air might pass. Shirts, aprons, stockings, underclothes, rags for babies, work cloths, hand towels if the family's lucky enough to own hand towels. All of it must somehow be renewed. The smell of wet fabric rises thickly. The room grows humid. Fingers redden in the water. Knuckles chap. A woman bending over a tub can seem to be fighting the whole city one collar at a time. You hear the slap of cloth against board, the squeak of wringing, the metallic lid of the kettle shifting over heat. Children are warned not to step in the washwater, which makes stepping in it much more likely. A line is run across the room or outside between windows. Damp garments sway above the family like a row of resigned ghosts. In winter, they may dry slowly and sourly. In summer, they may stiffen with city dust almost as soon as they are clean. New York has a remarkable talent for returning dirt to the innocent. There is also the matter of waste, a topic no one chooses for polite conversation, and everyone must manage anyway. In crowded tenements, privies were often shared by many households. The word shared sounds almost cooperative. It was rarely that charming. A privy in the yard or rear of the property might serve numerous tenants, which means constant traffic, indifferent maintenance, and a smell that arrives before you do. On warm days, the odour can seem to sit over the court like a thick blanket no one ordered. You make the trip because there is no alternative. The ground near the privy may be wet in suspicious ways. Boards are worn smooth by many feet. The door, if it closes properly, counts as a luxury. Flies take an energetic interest in the proceedings. A child sent alone may return frightened, embarrassed, or simply annoyed at the indignity of the whole design. Adults develop the blank practical face required by necessity. There is no poetry in the place, only endurance. The smell is unforgettable. Sour waste, damp wood, rot, refuse, and the sweetly sick note of things left too long in summer heat. Add nearby ash barrels, kitchen scraps, and whatever the neighbours have thrown where they should not, and the yard becomes an education in the urban atmosphere. You breathe through your mouth and discover this does not help nearly as much as people claim. These conditions affected health in obvious and less obvious ways. Poor drainage, fouled yards, and overcrowded sanitation arrangements created environments where disease could travel with disturbing ease. Cholera had terrified New York in earlier outbreaks, and other illnesses remained common companions of crowded city life. Scholars still argue over how much ordinary tenants understood about the mechanisms of contagion, compared with the simple, visible fact of filth. You do not need a medical theory to know that foul air and dirty water make a person uneasy. The body understands insult before science names it. Yet people tried to impose order. That part matters too. Women scrubbed steps. Families aired bedding when weather allowed. Ashes were swept. Chamber pots were emptied. Children were marched to the pump for washing whether they liked it or not. Respectability, health, and morale all met in the same bucket. A clean apron could not transform a tenement, but it could remind the wearer she had not surrendered completely. An orderly shelf, a swept corner, a washed child on Sunday morning. These were tiny acts of resistance against the general chaos. One quirky detail from crowded city life is the fierce role of smell in neighbourly judgment. People noticed everything: who used strong soap, who fried fish too often, who failed to rinse diapers well enough, who let slop sit, who kept a suspiciously tidy room despite impossible odds. Reputation floated through a building on the air itself. A woman might be praised as clean not because anyone had inspected her room with scientific care, but because the hall outside her door smelled of fresh scrubbing instead of old cabbage. In such places, scent became social evidence. The disposal of washwater and kitchen slops brought its own negotiations. Some was carried back out and emptied into designated places, or into places designated by laziness rather than law. Some found its way to gutters, from windows. Careless tenants might dump without proper warning. The city below knew the risk. A passer-by hearing a shout above had only a second to decide whether to leap aside. This habit was older than 1860, but traces of it lingered where regulation and good sense had not entirely conquered convenience. New York was modernizing. Yes. It was also still New York. Inside the room, water leaves marks everywhere. A dark ring under the bucket, damp cuffs, a shining patch on the boards where a spill was wiped quickly. Steam fogging the window for a few precious minutes before the glass cools again. When a child falls ill, you feel the absence of easy water more sharply. Cloths for the forehead, a cup for sips, the need to wash soiled bedding. All of it multiplies the work. A healthy family can struggle with the bucket. A sick one enters negotiations with exhaustion itself. Bathing the whole body is a luxury of a labour rather than leisure. Small children may be washed in a tub or basin by the stove, their cheeks glowing from heat and complaint. Older children get a brisker version, more practical than pleasant. Adults often settle for partial washing because fuel and water must answer to too many claims. Cleanliness exists in degrees. Hands and faces first, feet when possible, hair when there is time and enough warm water to justify the battle. You become skilled at presenting yourself as cleaner than you quite feel, and still there are moments of almost absurd tenderness. A mother warming water just enough so a baby does not cry. A father carefully rinsing the Sunday shirt because appearances matter at church and in the eyes of employers. Sisters combing one another's hair by the window light, tugging and apologising in equal measure. A boy entrusted with carrying water without spilling it and returning triumphant. Shoulders straighter by half an inch. These little victories hold a household together. By evening, the pail stands less than full. The basin has been emptied and rinsed. The yard smells stronger as the day fades warm. Someone nearby is still washing late. Sleeves rolled past the elbows, face set in that expression of domestic determination which could probably intimidate an army. From the hallway comes the mixed odour of damp garments, boiled potatoes, and soap that never quite defeats the building. You rub your hands dry on an apron or shirt and feel the slight roughness left by lye. Night does not erase the matter. Chamber pots wait. A child may wake thirsty. Rain, if it comes, taps at the window and sounds almost luxurious, as though the sky possesses more water than any one family could imagine carrying. You listen to it and think how strange the city is. It is bounded by rivers, ringed by harbour, damp with weather. Yet inside the tenement, every useful drop must still be argued into service. You lie down with the smells of soap, steam, and the yard still lingering in the air. The room feels close, but your skin is cleaner than it was at dawn. The cooking pot is rinsed, the children are washed enough for morning, and the bucket stands ready for another trip. It is not a grand victory. It is a tenement victory, which means it counts. Work begins before the body agrees to it. In a New York tenement in 1860, the day does not politely separate home from labour. It drags one into the other until even the air in the room seems employed. You wake to footsteps in the hall, to a cart in the street, to the hiss of a stove being coaxed alive somewhere nearby, and before breakfast is fully settled in your stomach, the question is already there. Who has work today? Where? For how long? And whether it will be enough. For immigrant families, earning money is not one clean story. It is a patchwork stitched from wages, odd jobs, home piecework, street selling, laundry, hauling, sewing, and whatever else can be traded for a few coins. A man may leave at dawn hoping to be chosen for dock labour and return at dusk chosen by nobody. A woman may spend the day sewing collars or shirts at home for pitiful pay, her fingers moving while a pot simmers and a child fusses. An older child may be sent to earn rather than learn. The city does not care much how the money arrives. It only notices when the rent does not. You step into the street early because the street has already begun without you. Wheels strike stone. A driver snaps his reins. Men in work clothes move with that fast, purposeful gait of people who cannot afford to look uncertain. The smell is cold iron, horses, wet mud, and smoke lifting from countless chimneys. The sky above the roofs is pale, but down here the day already feels used. If you are a father in such a household, or simply the strongest wage earner present, the search for work can be its own exhausting profession. The docks pull many men because ships keep arriving and cargo keeps moving, but employment there is irregular and competitive. Warehouses need hands. Builders need labourers when construction is brisk. Carting, digging, unloading, carrying, sweeping, chopping, and lifting all awaits someone desperate enough to accept poor pay and rough treatment. Immigrants often found themselves funneled into these lower-paid, unstable jobs, partly through language, partly through prejudice, and partly because new arrivals cannot be choosy when children are waiting at home. You stand among other men hoping to be hired for the day, and the scene has all the tenderness of a livestock yard. Foremen look quickly. Shoulders, age, strength. Whether you seem likely to complain, whether your English is passable, whether your boots suggest you can survive a full day on slippery planks or muddy ground, the chosen men step forward. The rest pretend not to feel the sting. Rejection in public has a particular taste, dry and metallic, like biting the inside of your cheek and swallowing the blood because nobody wants to watch you bleed. If you're lucky enough to be taken on, the labour is immediate and unromantic. Barrels are rolled, crates are hoisted, sacks are carried until your shoulders throb and your palms feel peeled from within. At the waterfront, the wind off the harbour cuts through damp cloth, and rope fibres bite into your hands. The boards beneath your boots are slick from spray, mud, or spilled cargo. Men shout to be heard over gulls, waves, and each other's irritation. A single mistake can bruise a foot, wrench a back, or cost the day's pay. There is no cushion around the body. It is the tool. It is also the thing being worn down. Many immigrant women work no less hard, though their labour is often forced into smaller rooms and noticed less generously. In the tenement apartment, a woman may turn the family room into a miniature workshop after breakfast. Needles, thread, scissors, cloth pieces, unfinished shirts, cigars to be rolled, artificial flowers to be assembled, or other piecework tasks can spread across the table and lap. The room becomes a place of production, not merely shelter. Children pass through it. Soup boils nearby. Light must be caught while it lasts. Her back bends, her eyes strain. The work repeats. Piecework has a special cruelty because it makes time feel cheap. So many stitches for so little pay that you begin to suspect the hours themselves have been stolen. Home labour also means that the day's work cannot be escaped by crossing a threshold. The threshold is already under your feet. A crying baby must be soothed while cuffs are hemmed. Bread must be sliced while thread is knotted. Ashes must be emptied while shirts are counted. Paid work and household work compete for the same hands. One does not excuse you from the other. In that sense, the tenement teaches a particularly sharp lesson about class. The poor do not finish work. They only switch varieties. Children are drawn into this economy as naturally and as cruelly as smoke rises to the ceiling. A small boy may sell newspapers, matches, fruit, or shoelaces in the street. A girl may mind younger siblings, fetch water, carry dinners to labouring relatives, or help with sewing at home. Slightly older children can be sent into workshop and factories, or errands that pay little but count for something. School exists, certainly, and reformers talk beautifully about education, but hunger makes its own argument. A family balancing rent against bread can rarely afford ideals in large portions. You see children carrying burdens that belong on older bones. A boy trots beside a wagon with a basket nearly as wide as his chest. A girl with red hands from washing rocks a baby with one foot while sorting buttons on the table. They do not always look miserable. That would almost be easier. Children adapt with alarming speed. They joke, quarrel, invent games between tasks, and take pride in contributing. That pride is real. So is the theft hidden inside it. The city itself offers 1,000 tiny occupations. Peddlers call from corners. Ragpickers search for anything with value left in it. Women take in laundry from better-off households and carry it back in damp bundles. Men sharpen knives, mend chairs, sweep yards, whitewash walls, dig cellars, or run errands nobody respectable wishes to do for themselves. One quirky detail from urban life in this period is how many jobs hovered on the edge of formal employment and scavenging. A person might collect bones, rags, cigar stumps, or scrap metal and sell them onward in a chain of usefulness so humble that it barely appears in official records. The city threw away things. The poor learned to hear them land. Labour also organises the senses of the neighbourhood. Listen closely and you can tell what sort of work surrounds you. The rattle of a sewing machine is still rare enough to be noticeable, while hand-stitching creates only the faint whisper of cloth moving across a lap. You hear cobblers tapping soles, coopers hammering hoops, carts grinding under weight, hawkers singing out their goods, and women beating laundry with the flat. Determined rhythm of necessity. Smell joins in. Tobacco leaf, wet cloth, starch, onions, horse dung, leather, glue, coal smoke, and sweat all drift together until work itself seems to have an odour. Inside workshops, if you enter them, the air can be thick with lint or dust. Windows are begrimed. Light falls in hard rectangles on benches and bent heads. Foremen patrol with the alert impatience of men paid to distrust everyone. Time moves strangely there. Hours can pass in a blur of repetition, then suddenly drag when your fingers ache and the clock appears to have stopped from malice. You breathe in other people's effort. You carry it home in your hair and clothes. Wages remain the great uncertainty. A day of labour may bring something. It may bring less than promised. It may be delayed, docked, or denied. Immigrant workers often face suspicion from native-born labourers and employers alike, accused of lowering wages while also being offered the meanest jobs. There is a grim elegance to that contradiction. You are told you are taking work and also that you are not fit for good work. New York manages both opinions before noon. Historians still argue about how much mobility these early years in the city truly allowed. Some families did climb, slowly, from the worst crowding toward better rooms and steadier trades. Others remained trapped by low pay, sickness, accidents, widowhood, or plain bad luck. The dream of advancement existed, but it had stiff competition from reality. A single illness could dissolve months of careful saving. A winter without enough labour could send furniture to the pawnshop. A man injured on the docks might discover that ambition does not carry sacks nearly as well as a healthy back. Meals around work follow a different rhythm than comfortable households imagine. Breakfast is quick and practical if there is enough to call it breakfast. Bread, tea, perhaps porridge, perhaps potatoes. Dinner may be carried cold or eaten standing, or postponed until the body is too tired to appreciate it. Supper in the evening can feel like both reward and reckoning. Everyone returns with the day on them. Dust on cuffs, tobacco scent in cloth, cracked nails, reddened eyes, sore feet, a mood 1 degree sharper than kindness. Food must not only fill the stomach, it must restore the idea that the family remains a unit, not merely several exhausted people sharing walls. The tenement room at midday can be strangely busy and strangely lonely. Those out at work have left gaps, but their absence is full of pressure. Their wages, or lack of wages, hover in the air. Those who remain keep moving. Needles flash. Water is boiled. A toddler is hushed. Laundry is folded. A boarder may sleep odd hours if his shift runs at night or starts before dawn. The table holds work one moment and a bowl of soup the next. A home like this cannot afford empty space or idle surfaces. Everything must justify itself. Evening returns workers in waves. First come the children sent on errands or small trades, then women carrying bundles or market scraps, then men from docks, carts, and yards, shoulders dropped with fatigue. The stairwell fills with voices and with the smells of the city clinging to them. One smells of fish and rope, another of tobacco and paper, another of brick dust, another of beer, because some labourers spend part of the day's pay trying to forget how it was earned. This does not always improve domestic harmony. Tension can gather around money before a single coin hits the table. How much was earned? How much spent on food or fuel? Whether a promised job continues tomorrow? Whether the landlord has knocked? Whether boots need resoling? Whether the child who sold matches kept back a penny for a sweet? Family life under economic pressure becomes a kind of low-temperature storm, not always violent, but never entirely still. Harsh words can flare from ordinary worries. So can jokes. Humour survives in poor households partly because it is cheaper than despair. There are moments, too, when labour creates fellowship. Men compare foremen, wages, and injuries with grim amusement. Women share techniques for stretching soup or speeding stitches. Children boast about sales, or complain about difficult customers with theatrical outrage. Advice travels through buildings as freely as noise. Where to find better day work? Which contractor cheats less? Which market stalls reduce prices late? Which corner is best for selling apples? This practical knowledge is social wealth, passed hand to hand among people who do not possess much else. One fringe tidbit from the period is the suspicion some middle-class observers directed toward home-based labour, as if crowded families working in their rooms somehow contaminated goods with poverty itself. Shirts sewn in tenements, cigars rolled near cooking stoves, garments finished beside sleeping children. All of this offended respectable sensibilities while depending on respectable demand. Society wanted cheap goods without examining the rooms that produced them. An old habit, really, very old, distressingly durable. When the day finally quiets, the body tallies its account. Feet burn, shoulders pulse, fingertips feel blunt from thread or rough from rope, eyes smart from dim light or dust. You sit, perhaps only for a moment, and feel the deep tiredness that comes from spending yourself in many directions at once. Outside, carts still pass, a late vendor still calls. Somewhere in the building someone is finishing work by lamplight, because the piece must be done, or the coin will vanish. You look around the room and see labour everywhere, the patched sleeve, the loaf bought with wages, the fuel paid for by stitches, the child asleep from errands, the bucket filled, the floor swept, the soup stirred, the rent partly gathered. Work has entered every object. It rests in the kettle, the candle, the chair, the crust of bread. Nothing here is casual. Every comfort has a cost attached and a person behind it. At last bedding is laid out, tools or cloth are put aside, and the room returns to its nighttime arrangement. Yet even then labour does not fully leave. Tomorrow waits inside the boots by the door, inside the unfinished shirt folded on the table, inside the sore hands that will need to open again at dawn. You close your eyes in the close tenement air, listening to a last cough in the hall and a last wagon outside, and you understand something simple. In this life, work is not only what you do, it is the weather you live under. By the middle of tenement life, you begin to understand that the household does not run on money alone. Money is important, obviously. Money buys flour, coal, rent, lamp oil, boots, and the occasional miracle of meat. But the household survives because someone keeps all the smaller disasters from joining hands. In 1860 New York, that work often falls on mothers, older daughters, widowed grandmothers, aunts, or any woman old enough to be drafted into domestic command. The apartment may be cramped and smoky, but inside it there is still a government, and it usually wears an apron. The day starts with calculation, not numbers on paper, usually, numbers in the head. How much bread remains, whether the onions are soft enough to last another stew, whether the coal bin looks thin, whether the youngest child needs new stockings, or can survive one more week with careful darning and strategic sitting. A household like this does not drift through the morning. It measures every crust, Every spoonful, every patch of cloth gets weighed against hunger, weather, and pride. You move around the room, and the room moves around you. A kettle is set on the stove, the table is cleared, a baby's shirt is turned right side out, a loaf is cut thinner than anyone would choose in easier times. The smell of tea or weak coffee rises with the smell of yesterday's ashes being stirred back into usefulness. There is a softness to some of these gestures, but not much softness in the conditions. Domestic care in a tenement is brisk because there are too many claims and too little space for ceremony. Meals are built from patience as much as ingredients. Potatoes become breakfast, then part of supper, then perhaps the base of tomorrow's soup if mashed with onion and enough optimism. Cabbage appears frequently because it keeps, fills, and forgives. Bread is respected to the last heel. Beans, porridge, broth, scraps of salt pork when luck permits, bits of herring, stale crusts soaked back into life. All of it passes through hands practiced at making very little seem almost adequate. The stove gives off a dry heat and a smell of iron and smoke. When something fries in fat, even a little, the whole room brightens as if a holiday has knocked by mistake. Immigrant women often carried cooking traditions from home and then revised them under American conditions. A familiar recipe might be stripped down by cost, altered by what the neighbourhood market offered, or stretched to feed boarders as well as children. You can imagine the odd combinations that resulted. Old world habits meeting New York necessity in one overworked pot. A dish remembered from a village feast becomes weekday fare without the feast part. Another meal survives only in seasoning because the proper ingredients cost too much. Historians know food carried identity, but they also know hunger edits culture with ruthless efficiency. The market trip can be its own campaign. You leave the room with a basket, a few coins, and a face prepared not to be impressed by anyone's prices. The street smells of fish, mud, horse dung, warm bread, smoke, and rotting vegetables under the edge of the cart. Vendors call loudly, each one claiming freshness with the confidence of a man standing over produce that has clearly seen things. You handle onions, examine cabbage leaves, weigh flour, and ask the price of scraps nobody wealthy would notice. The trick is to choose food that is cheap without choosing insult. Sometimes the city refuses the distinction. Children trail beside you, or are sent back with small purchases. One carries potatoes in an apron fold, another grips a loaf like a sacred object. A little one begs for a sweet and receives the look that means this is not the day to discuss luxury. Yet mothers and older sisters are not only strict accountants, they are also the managers of appetite, morale, and fairness. Which child gets the larger piece? Who has earned the second helping? Whether the sick child should be tempted with broth first? These choices are made so often that they almost disappear into the texture of the day, though they shape how the household remembers itself. Back in the apartment there is mending. There is always mending, shirts fray, trousers split at the knee, aprons wear through. Children's stockings seem to dissolve from pure mischief. The family cannot buy its way out of damage, so cloth must be argued back into service. A woman by the window with needle and thread becomes part tailor, part magician, part stern philosopher. She turns collars, patches elbows, lets out seams, narrows hems, and saves every useful scrap. A worn adult shirt may become a child's garment. A torn skirt may surrender strips for patching. A blanket too shabby for honour may still provide pieces for warmth. The sound of mending is almost nothing, which makes it easy to miss. Thread pulled through cloth, scissors clipping a loose end, the tiny dry whisper of fabric turned in the lap. Outside, the city shouts and rattles. Inside, repair happens quietly. Yet this work holds great power. A mended coat means another week of respectability at church or at a hiring place. A patched sleeve spares a child from sharper embarrassment. Clothing does not merely cover the body, it announces whether the family is coping. There is also washing, sweeping, tidying, and the endless repositioning of objects in too little space. A tenement room demands management because disorder grows faster there than in comfortable homes. A spoon left in the wrong place is not a minor annoyance. It is part of the room's collapse. Shoes must be lined neatly, bedding rolled tightly, food kept away from dirt and mice as far as possible, ashes emptied before they spread, a bucket returned, scraps wrapped or saved. Every task is small, and all of them together are enormous. Mothers in these households are not simply nurturing figures framed by candlelight. That sentimental version would make them laugh, and probably not kindly. They are logisticians, negotiators, healers of scraped knees and damaged tempers, watchers of the stove and the rent, judges in sibling disputes, defenders of the good cup, interpreters for relatives with weaker English, guardians of customs that make the room feel like more than an accident of poverty. They may also be wage earners, laundresses, seamstresses, charwomen, market sellers, all of the above before noon. One scholarly question that still invites debate is how much authority immigrant women gained within poor urban households by managing budgets and home labour, and how much that authority was limited by custom, male wages, and the instability of city life. Some historians emphasise women's practical control over daily survival. Others point out how fragile that power could be when jobs vanished, drunkenness intruded, or widowhood struck. Both perspectives fit the tenement. Power here is rarely grand. It is exercised over soup, thread, rent, and whether the children go to bed fed enough to sleep. Sickness adds another layer of work. A child with fever must be cooled, watched, coaxed to drink. Bedding must be changed. Quiet must be imposed on a room that does not respect quiet. A cough from one corner can redraw the day for everyone. If a husband comes home hurt from labour, the evening's tasks bend around his injury. Domestic care becomes nursing with no proper tools but patience, cloth, and whatever remedy neighbours swear by. Onion poultices, herbal teas, mustard plasters, broth, prayer, and stern optimism all make their appearance. Some work because time helps them. Others help because belief does. There are moments of tenderness hidden in the drudgery. A mother smoothing a child's hair while waiting for porridge to thicken. An older sister warming stockings by the stove before dressing the little ones on a cold morning. A woman saving the best crust for a husband too proud to ask if there is more. These gestures are not separate from hardship. They are how hardship is made bearable. In a room where privacy is scarce and tempers can fray, affection often appears as labour done carefully. The sounds of the day tell you who is keeping the household stitched together. You hear the lid lift from the pot, the broom's rough sweep. The quick murmur used to soothe a baby. The firmer murmur used to stop two children from fighting over a spoon. The thump of kneading, the snap of thread bitten off between teeth. There may be singing, but not always. There may be laughter, especially the dry kind that comes from surviving another absurd inconvenience. Humour in a tenement kitchen is often half complaint and half resilience. A burned potato may inspire language sharp enough to season the whole meal. One quirky detail from immigrant domestic life is the way prized objects could become almost ceremonial in their importance. A good frying pan, a coffee grinder, a crock with a lid that still fits, a featherbed cover brought from home even if the feathers themselves are long gone. A china figure on a shelf, chipped but still displayed. These things do more than serve. They remind the family that not everything has been reduced to bare function. A room may be poor and still contain beauty with a stubborn face. Children learn domestic work early, whether they enjoy the lesson or not. A girl may be taught to thread a needle before she can write her full name. A boy may be sent for coal, bread, or water and told not to dawdle, which naturally produces at least some dawdling. Tusks become badges of growing up. Peel these potatoes, hold the baby, shake the rug, watch the pot, keep the toddler away from the stove. Responsibility arrives in pieces, and childhood narrows around it. Yet there can be pride in that too. To be trusted with the market penny or the washing line is to matter. There is also the matter of appearances, even in poverty, and perhaps especially there. The family tries to present itself respectably when possible. Hair is combed, faces are washed, aprons are changed before visitors or church. A collar is straightened, boots are wiped. This is not vanity exactly. It is social armour. In crowded immigrant neighbourhoods, women judged one another, helped one another, borrowed from one another, and watched one another with relentless attention. The state of your children, your doorstep, and your washing line all entered the neighbourhood's verdict. A clean child in a patched coat might say more about the household than a rich one in a careless mood. The afternoon can feel especially long. The room is warm near the stove, dim away from the window, and full of the smells of wool, soap, cooked cabbage, and tired wood. Fingers ache from sewing, eyes blur a little. A child grows fretful. Another returns with news from the street that is not nearly as useful as he thinks. Still, supper must be assembled, bread sliced, pot stirred, table cleared, a boarder accounted for, a shirt folded. There is no dramatic turning point, only task after task arriving with the confidence of unpaid creditors. When evening comes and the wage earners return, the room fills with fresh needs. Food must be served, complaints heard, faces read. A mother often becomes the first audience for the day's humiliations and hopes. No work, hard work, poor pay. A foreman shouted. A child sold everything. Another child lost a penny. Someone saw a fight in the street. Someone heard of a room coming free in a less awful building. Someone else's cousin found steady work. News enters the apartment like weather, and the woman managing the room must absorb it without letting the whole household tip over. This authority is rarely announced. No speech is made. No title granted. Yet you can feel it when a room settles because she has decided supper is now. When children obey because the line has been reached. When a husband hands over wages into hands that know how to split them among rent, fuel, flour, and impossible wishes. When a boarder lowers his voice out of respect or caution. Quiet control like this rarely appears in official records, but it holds households upright all the same. As night nears, the domestic labour softens but does not vanish. Clothes for tomorrow are laid out. Needles are put away. The last bowl is rinsed. The fire is banked if fuel allows. Children are pushed toward bedding with a final sweep of hands over faces and hair. The room smells now of supper, lamp smoke, and the faint clean note of recently scrubbed cloth drying by the wall. Outside, the city still clatters, but inside the apartment another day's work has been turned into continuation. You look around and see not comfort exactly, but maintenance, which in a place like this is a form of love. The shirts are patched. The children are fed as well as they can be. The room has not won, but neither has it defeated the family. And somewhere between the kettle, the mending, the market basket, and the tired hands folding aprons in the lamplight, you understand how immigrant households in these tenements endured, not by ease, by endless care, repeated until survival started to resemble ordinary life. Children are everywhere in the tenement world, not in the sentimental painted way, with polished curls and spotless cheeks and a toy waiting quietly in the corner. Nothing so luxurious. In New York in 1860, children spill through stairwells, yards, alleys, stoops, and streets with the restless energy of creatures raised in cramped rooms and noisy neighbourhoods. They are underfoot, in the way, helpful, troublesome, funny, sharp-eyed, and often far too familiar with work, danger, and disappointment. If you want to understand immigrant tenement life properly, you have to lower your gaze and follow the smaller shoes. Morning starts with motion. A child wakes quickly in a crowded room because there is no choice. Someone needs space to dress. Someone else needs the basin. A baby has already begun objecting to existence in a voice loud enough for the building to review. The older children learn to roll up bedding, wash faces, tug on stockings, and find their place in the room's traffic before they are fully awake. They do not float into the day. They are folded into it like extra hands. Some are sent on errands almost at once. Bread from the baker, water from the pump, coal from the yard or dealer. A message carried to a father seeking day work. A dinner pail delivered to a workshop or dock if the distance is manageable, and the child can be trusted not to lose either the food or the directions. Trust arrives early in a tenement because adults are too busy to postpone it. A child running through these streets notices things differently from an adult. Adults see prices, employers, rent, and the fatigue at the end of the day. Children see the red shine of apples on a cart, the dog sleeping under the butcher's bench, the way smoke curls from a grating, the thrilling chance of sliding across a patch of frozen mud before being shouted at. They also see where trouble waits, which stoop belongs to the man who hates noise, which alley is safe enough for games, which corner boys steal marbles, which woman will hand out crusts if asked politely, and which will hand out scolding instead. For poor immigrant families, children often move between play and labour with barely a seam between them. A boy might spend 1 hour chasing a hoop down the lane, and the next carrying bundles for a few coins. A girl might skip rope in the yard, then be called upstairs to mind a baby while her mother finishes mending. Childhood was not absent. Exactly. It simply had to share the room with necessity. Historians still argue over how much freedom urban children enjoyed within these crowded neighbourhoods, compared with the discipline demanded by survival. The answer seems to be a maddening combination of both. They roamed more than many modern children would be allowed to, yet they also worked harder and faced dangers more casually accepted. The streets themselves become a rough school. You learn by watching wagons. Never trust a driver to see you. You learn by reading faces. That man is drunk. That one is merely tired. That woman selling pies may chase you if you touch before paying. You learn by scent. Fresh bread means the bakery has just opened. Fish gone sour means step around the barrel and do not ask questions. Rain mixed with horse droppings means the corner is treacherous. Smoke from a nearby chimney means the wind has changed. A tenement child grows alert in all senses because the city keeps testing them. Games happen anyway. They have to. Children play in every miserable environment history can invent because refusing would be an insult to childhood itself. In the cramped yards and side streets near tenements, they improvise. They race hoops with sticks. They toss marbles in patches of dirt. They jump rope if there is room enough not to lose an eye. They chalk little boundaries on stone. They play tag around piles of crates and ash barrels. They invent heroic dramas from scraps, pretending a broken broom handle is a musket or a royal sceptre according to the day's mood. The laughter is quick, loud, and often interrupted by chores. A peculiar little detail from urban childhood is how much treasure could be found in things adults had discarded. A bent spoon, a cigar box, bits of ribbon, buttons, corks, nail heads, string, a cracked doll's arm if fortune smiled in a sinister way. These became toys, tools, or currency in children's secret economies. The city threw off fragments and children repurposed them with dazzling speed. A stick was never merely a stick. It was transportation, weaponry, architecture, and grand personal authority. Yet the streets are not kind. They are simply available. Open gutters, heavy carts, stray animals, quarrelsome older boys, and the constant possibility of being knocked down, cheated, or lured into bad company all linger nearby. A child can vanish into a crowd faster than a mother's heart can bear. The fear is ordinary enough to become part of daily breathing. Mothers send children out because they must, then listen for their return beneath every other sound. A delayed child can stretch 10 minutes into catastrophe. Schooling exists, but it does not command every child's day. Public education is growing in this era, and reformers speak with great confidence about the civilizing power of schoolrooms. Still, attendance for poor immigrant children can be irregular. Work intrudes, illness intrudes, shoes wear out. Younger siblings need watching. A family newly arrived may prize schooling and still lose the battle to immediate hunger. Some children pick up letters from school, church, street signs, and newspapers used to wrap purchases. Others learn more about market prices than spelling. Inside the tenement room, children fill every corner with signs of themselves. Small stockings hung to dry, a wooden toy missing a wheel, a crust hidden for later, chalk on a sill, a slate if the family is fortunate, a doll made from scraps of cloth and a face drawn in thread or charcoal. Crumbs appear wherever children have existed recently, which is to say everywhere. The room may be ruled by adult necessity, but it is still unmistakably inhabited by the young. Older siblings carry particular burdens. A girl of 10 or 12 may know how to lift a baby, settle porridge, thread a needle, sweep, run to market, and quiet a toddler's tantrum with a look borrowed from her mother. A boy the same age may fetch fuel, stand in line for errands, help carry water, or try small trades in the street. Their competence can be impressive and a little heartbreaking. There is pride in it. Yes, families often praise the capable child because capability keeps the household from splintering. But the price is visible in the seriousness that arrives too soon around the mouth and eyes. Children also absorb the many languages of the neighbourhood faster than adults sometimes do. They pick up English in the street, in school, from signs, from other children, from insults shouted at them, and from the practical need to bargain or dodge trouble. At home they may answer in a blend of old country words and new city slang. This can make them useful interpreters and slightly alarming creatures. They belong to the family and are already half translating it into something else. Some parents take pride in this. Others worry the old language is slipping from small tongues too quickly. Religion and custom touch childhood closely. A child may learn prayers before letters. A medal, cross, or little charm may be pinned inside clothes to guard against sickness or bad luck. Some families fear the evil eye with a seriousness that coexists quite comfortably with church attendance. Others keep old village remedies tucked beside newer city habits. Historians still disagree about how much such beliefs declined in the immigrant districts once families settled in New York. But among children these customs remained lively. A strange fever, a run of accidents, a baby who cries too hard, all might attract whispered explanations, half sacred and half superstitious. You also notice how closely children study adult moods. They can read a room in seconds. Whether father found work, whether mother is worried about rent, whether it is wise to ask for more bread, whether the boarder is in a temper, whether a baby must not be woken under any circumstances, not even if the building itself catches fire, and perhaps not even then. Children in crowded homes become excellent readers of weather without ever using the word emotional. They simply know when the air is dangerous. Illness haunts childhood more heavily in these districts than anyone would choose to admit. Coughs linger, fevers spread, stomachs turn, eyes redden. A child pale and quiet in a room full of noise can frighten a whole household more than a child who cries. The tenement gives disease easy opportunities. Overcrowding, poor sanitation, weak diets, and cold winters all make young bodies work harder than they should. Yet children also recover with astonishing suddenness sometimes, leaping from misery to mischief within hours, as if they have privately decided the adults have worried enough. Street trades attract many boys and some girls as they grow older. Newsboys, bootblacks, match sellers, flower sellers, errand runners, and assorted little entrepreneurs become part of the city's texture. You hear them in the calls rising along the curb, high voices advertising papers or produce, bare feet slapping stone in warm weather, coins clinking in pockets so lightly that every one of them counts. A child who earns even a little may carry home both money and status. Contribution matters. Being useful matters. So does the dangerous thrill of having one small piece of independence in a city that mostly orders you about. Sometimes children form packs by block or alley, bound by accent, rivalry, boredom, and loyalty is shifting as smoke. Fights happen. So do alliances. A newcomer may be teased for clothes, language, or country. Then a week later he is part of the game. Tenement neighbourhoods can be cruel in miniature and generous in miniature too. A shared crust, a warning shout about an approaching wagon, a borrowed marble, a fierce defence against boys from the next street. All count as the currency of belonging. Girls' worlds are often watched more closely, at least in theory. Parents worry about reputation, safety, and the city's roughness. Yet girls still move through these neighbourhoods with baskets, siblings, and errands that make them highly visible. They learn to be quick, alert, and verbally well armed. A sharp tongue can protect a girl nearly as well as fast feet in some corners of New York. Nearly. Not always. Families know this, which is why the timing of errands, the choice of streets, and the company kept all become matters for constant instruction. One thing the tenement does not allow is prolonged innocence. A child living there hears adult quarrels through walls, sees drunkenness in the street, notices sickness, learns that money disappears, and understands surprisingly early that some families fare better than others. They know which neighbour lost a job, which room took in another boarder, which baby is not expected to live, Which father comes home angry? Which mother cries only when she thinks nobody is awake? This knowledge does not always make them solemn. Sometimes it makes them funnier. Gallows humour is not only for soldiers and dock workers. Children discover it too, and yet there is tenderness everywhere if you watch closely. A line of girls braiding one another's hair on a stoop. A boy carrying his little sister piggyback through mud so her shoes stay dry. Children sharing roasted chestnuts bought from one precious penny. A mother rubbing a child's cold hands between her own before sending him back outside. Bedtime prayers whispered in accents still fresh from another shore. Lullabies drifting over the boards from one family to another. Small heads bent together over a torn picture paper. The city's harshness does not erase affection. It makes these gestures shine harder. By evening the children come back into the room carrying the day on them. Faces smudged, shoes damp, pockets full of string, crumbs and mysteries. One returns proud from an errand completed well. Another returns offended by a rival or a scolding. The baby is fretful from too much noise. The older girl looks older than she did that morning. Supper is served, stories spill out, and the room expands emotionally even though the walls stay put. There are complaints, boasts, laughter, tears, and the occasional suspicious silence that suggests someone has definitely done something and hopes darkness will hide it. At last, bedding is spread and smaller bodies are folded into place. A child asks a question too large for the hour. Another is asleep before the sentence ends. The room smells of soup, wool, lamp smoke, and hair warmed by the day. Outside, the city still mutters, but inside the little breaths begin to settle into an even rhythm. You lie there and realize that childhood in a tenement is neither purely grim nor charmingly rough. It is crowded, inventive, useful, vulnerable, noisy, and alive. The children grow under pressure, certainly, but they also grow into the only kind of city childhood possible there, making games from rubble and belonging from very little. By now you have learned that the tenement is never only your family's home. It is a stack of other lives pressed close against yours, breathing through the same stale halls, cooking through the same thin walls, and carrying their own versions of worry up the same narrow stairs. In 1860 New York, immigrant families do not live in neat little islands of privacy. They live wall to wall with strangers, cousins, near strangers, boarders, widows, labourers, babies, and old people who seem to have survived 3 governments and do not intend to be impressed by a 4th. Every landing is a social experiment. Every shared yard is a negotiation. You begin to know the building through sound before you know it through names. There is the man on the 2nd floor whose cough arrives before dawn and sounds like he has swallowed a drawer of nails. There is the woman at the rear who sings while she scrubs, never the full song, always a fragment, as if the rest belongs to someone absent. There are the twins who thunder down the steps as one creature with 4 feet. There is the boarder who comes home late and tries, unsuccessfully, to walk quietly. A tenement teaches you your neighbours by rhythm. A shuffle, a laugh, a kettle lid, a quarrel muffled just enough to suggest effort. Long before introductions, you know who slams doors. Names come slowly and sometimes oddly. You may know a woman as the red shawl lady for weeks before learning she is Mrs. Hennessy. A German cobbler downstairs is simply the bootman until someone mentions Herr Bauer. A widow with 3 children becomes the one with the yellow canary, because the canary makes a stronger impression than her surname. In crowded buildings, identity is built from practical markers. The family with the quiet girls, the old couple who smell of pipe smoke and caraway, the man who drinks, the woman who lends salt but not sugar. Everyone is simplified a little by proximity. This closeness creates a strange kind of intimacy. You know things you never asked to know. Who is behind on rent, who is expecting a baby, who has enough coal, who has visitors on Sundays, who cries when she thinks the stairwell covers the sound. It is not gossip at first, it is architecture. Thin walls and shared spaces turn private life outward whether anyone wishes it or not. Gossip simply arrives later, like a committee formed to organise what the building already revealed. New York's immigrant districts are often described as if each block belonged cleanly to one nationality. But daily life was messier. Certain streets did tilt strongly Irish. German, or toward another group, and kin networks matter deeply. Yet in many crowded places you live beside people from several backgrounds at once. The hallway might echo with English inflected by County Clare, then German, then something from Scandinavia, then a dialect from elsewhere no clerk would bother to name correctly. This jumble could produce friendship, confusion, friction, and accidental comedy. Sometimes in the span of one afternoon, you stand in the yard at the pump and hear the city inventing itself in fragments. A woman mutters in Irish while waiting her turn. Another answers in English with a German accent thick enough to spread on bread. A child translates half correctly, half boldly, and the business somehow continues. Language becomes part of neighbourliness, part obstacle, part entertainment. People learn keywords first: water, rent, bread, fire, baby, doctor, stop that, essential civilization. Some neighbours become allies quickly. A woman from the next room shows you where to buy cheaper potatoes late in the day. Another warns you which landlord's agent cannot be trusted. Someone lends a kettle, then a cup, then perhaps a little yeast or a handful of onions when times are thin. A building full of poor people contains more borrowing than many banks. Salt travels from room to room, so do chairs, needles, blankets, candles, and bits of news. These exchanges build invisible threads between families. Debt is not always written down. Gratitude rarely is. Both are remembered anyway. Women often create the strongest neighbourhood ties because they meet at the pump, on the stairs, in the market, with washing, with children, and in the endless circulation of domestic need. Friendship grows in practical soil. Hold my baby while I fetch coal. Watch the pot for one moment. Tell me whether this cough sounds serious. Borrow my soap today and return it when your cousin sends money. These are the bricks of tenement sociability. Affection may come later, though sometimes it arrives disguised as criticism. A woman who scolds your child and hands him bread in the same minute has probably accepted your family into the building's moral weather. Men's neighbourly ties can be warmer or more brittle, depending on wages, drink, politics, and pride. Labouring men share job tips, compare employers, grumble about pay, and stand in doorways discussing news from the old country or the latest insult from the new one. But they also compete for scarce work, argue over religion or national grievances imported intact from Europe, and quarrel over noise, drink, or debts. One man's drinking companions are another family's midnight nuisance. Fellowship and irritation sit very close together in a tenement, like two boarders sharing a bed unwillingly. Children move across these boundaries faster than the adults. They form little street republics held together by games, fights, and convenience. A German boy and an Irish girl may speak to each other in a rough shared English outside, then return indoors to households that eye one another with caution. Children are often the first diplomats of a building, though their diplomacy involves stolen apples, marbles, and shrieking. Their friendships can soften adult suspicion. Their quarrels can inflame it. A dispute over a hoop in the yard may become, by supper time, a full moral case involving two mothers, one grandmother, and an aunt who is not even present, but has very strong views. The smells of neighbouring families drift through the building and announce difference more quickly than speech. One room gives off rye bread and onion, another cabbage and bacon, another garlic, vinegar, and a soup unfamiliar enough to make children peer curiously. Laundry soap differs too. Tobacco differs. Hair oil differs. Incense clings to one family after church, beer to another after supper. In these close quarters, culture enters not as an abstract concept, but as a smell under your door. You can learn a great deal about a people by what is frying at 6 o'clock. One quirky truth about crowded immigrant life is how quickly buildings developed unofficial specialists. There is often a woman known for settling fevers, another for assisting births, another for writing letters, another for reading notices in English, another for taking in washing if a crisis hits, and perhaps one stern person who knows every rent date in the universe and acts personally offended when others forget. Expertise in a tenement does not require certificates. It requires survival, confidence and witnesses, Religious difference can unite or divide with equal efficiency. Catholic families may cluster around parish life, feast days, and devotions that give structure to the week. Protestants carry their own habits and prejudices. A building may contain both, along with people too tired or too poor to observe much except necessity. Religious objects appear in rooms and on bodies. A crucifix above the bed, a Bible wrapped carefully in cloth, a saint's image, a prayer muttered on the stairs. These things comfort their owners and occasionally alarm their neighbours. Historians still argue over how much old-world sectarian tension survived intact in the tenements versus being diluted by the common pressure of poverty. The answer, like so much else, seems to be both. Shared hardship encourages cooperation. Identity does not vanish just because rent is due. Holidays and special occasions reveal the building's social fabric in interesting ways. Music escapes from one room and draws listeners in the hall. A christening brings extra visitors and the smell of better food than usual. Someone bakes on a feast day and sends a plate next door. Someone else pretends not to care and then asks for the recipe. The tenement can briefly feel festive, as though the walls themselves have loosened. Children race in cleaner clothes. Men stand taller after a little drink. Women compare fabrics and babies and weather. For a few hours, the building becomes not merely a machine for storing labouring bodies, but a small village stacked upright. Then there are the quarrels. No honest account of tenement neighbours can avoid them. Too much noise, too much smoke, water taken out of turn, children fighting, rent gossip, a shared privy left disgracefully, a boarder making eyes at the wrong girl, laundry dripping where it should not, a borrowed pan returned blackened, someone singing too late, someone coughing all night, someone refusing to cough quietly, the inconsiderate brute. In crowded housing, minor annoyances grow fat on repetition. What would be trivial in a roomy house becomes a weekly crisis when there is no retreat from it. You might hear an argument begin as a murmur through the wall, then swell into sharp phrases on the landing. Doors open a little, heads appear. Witnesses bloom like flowers after rain. One woman says the child did no such thing. Another says the child absolutely did. A husband attempts peace and immediately makes everything worse. An old grandmother contributes a fatal sentence from her chair. The quarrel may burn out in minutes or smoulder for months, flaring at each new inconvenience, and yet, astonishingly, these same neighbours may borrow salt from one another the next morning. Survival does not permit endless purity. There is kindness too, often practical and unsentimental. A widow is helped with coal up the stairs. A new mother receives broth. A sick child is watched while his mother runs for medicine. A labourer injured on the docks finds his wife suddenly supplied with bits of food from 3 rooms nearby. Nobody calls this charity with grand gestures. It is simply what the building does when misfortune becomes too obvious to ignore. People who possess little still understand calamity. Perhaps especially then. Borders complicate the social picture further. A single male lodger might be treated as a useful inconvenience in one room, a suspicious presence in another, and a possible husband in the speculation of a third. They carry news from other wards, other jobs, and sometimes other nations. They also carry habits. Some are tidy, some are not. Some are quiet readers by candlelight. Some snore like collapsing furniture. The building notices all of it. A good boarder improves a household's finances and maybe its conversation. A bad one becomes communal entertainment and private misery. One scholarly uncertainty concerns how much genuine solidarity existed across immigrant groups in these neighbourhoods, as opposed to cooperation born strictly from necessity. Some historians stress mutual aid and shared class hardship. Others emphasise ethnic clustering, suspicion and conflict. From inside the tenement, the distinction may matter less than outsiders imagine. You can dislike a neighbour's politics, religion, manners, and cooking smells, while still trusting her to catch your child if he slips on the stairs. Human relationships are wonderfully untidy that way. The hallway itself is a social organ. People pause there with baskets, with gossip, with fatigue, with babies on the hip. News travels on the stairs. A fire downtown, a ship arrived, a man hired, a priest visiting, a death in the next block, meat cheaper at one stall, police nearby, landlord angry, A letter from home. The hallway knows all before supper. It smells of wet boots, lamp smoke, boiled dinner, and the faint must of damp wood. It also feels, at times, like the building's front parlour. Courtroom and newspaper all at once. At dusk, neighbours become silhouettes in doorways, framed by candlelight or the dull glow of stoves. Voices soften a little. Children are called indoors. Someone is still sewing. Someone tells beads. Someone laughs at a joke too tired to travel far. The walls remain thin, but the building settles into its evening temperament. You hear spoons, low talk, an infant refusing sleep, the scrape of a chair, maybe a fiddle trying to coax grace from worn strings. So many lives, so near, separate and tangled. You realise then that the tenement is not simply crowded. It is social in a way grand houses never need to be. Privacy is scarce, independence limited, and annoyance plentiful. But isolation is nearly impossible. Your family is held, pressed, judged, supported, overheard, inconvenienced, and occasionally rescued by the people on the other side of the wall. They are not chosen. They are simply there, day after day, becoming part of what life means in this city. And when night deepens, and the hallway grows dim, and the building begins its chorus of coughs, whispers, settling boards, and distant snores, you lie in the close dark knowing that home here is larger than one room. It includes the woman with the borrowed kettle, the old man with the impossible cough, the children shrieking in the yard, the family whose supper smells unlike your own, and the voices that rise and fall through the plaster-like weather. In a New York tenement, you do not merely live beside neighbours, you live among them. There are evenings in the tenement when the room seems to remember another country. Not literally, of course. The plaster remains cracked. The window still looks toward brick and laundry rather than hills, fields, or a village lane. The stove still needs fuel, the floor still creaks, and the hallway still smells faintly of boiled cabbage and damp wool. Yet in 1860 New York, immigrant families carry more than trunks into these rooms. They carry habits, holy days, recipes, songs, prayers, gestures, and little private ceremonies that soften the harsh edges of city life. In a place where so much has been stripped down to rent and labour, custom becomes a form of shelter. The change can begin with food. A weekday meal may be plain enough, but when a feast day, fast day, saint's day, name day, Sabbath, or holiday arrives, the apartment's ordinary rhythm shifts. A loaf is saved. A better cut of meat appears if the week's wages have not vanished elsewhere. Dough is mixed with unusual care. Spices, used sparingly most days, suddenly make their case from the shelf or the paper packet. The room fills with smells that do not belong entirely to New York. Sweet yeast, cinnamon, cloves, dill, roasted onions, garlic, rye, or warmed beer can draw memory closer than any speech. Children sniff the air and grow excited before they fully understand why. Old-world cooking does not survive untouched. That would be too easy and far too generous of history. Ingredients change, budgets interfere, markets substitute. A dish from home may lose one key item and gain another cheaper American one. Some recipes shrink, others become grand only in memory, reduced in practice to a simpler weekday cousin. Yet the effort matters. To cook a familiar holiday bread in a tenement room is to insist that life is more than labour and rent collection. It is to tell the children, and perhaps yourself, that the family did not arrive in New York as blank paper. You may see this most clearly on a Sunday or festival morning. Clothes are laid out more carefully, hair is combed with extra patience. The good shawl comes down from its nail, a collar is straightened, boots receive a rag and a hopeful shine. Even poor families keep categories of clothing in the mind, if not always in the trunk. Work clothes, everyday clothes, church clothes, funeral clothes if one is unlucky enough to need them. Respectability requires costume, and ritual requires effort. The tenement may be cramped, but preparation for worship can make it feel briefly ceremonial. Church, chapel, synagogue, or prayer meeting offers more than religion alone. It offers language, familiarity, community, and a rhythm older than the city streets. For many immigrant families, faith institutions anchor life in the New World. They help the newcomers find lodging, work leads, charity, schooling, or simply the comfort of hearing prayers shaped by the same cadences as those back home. A crowded district without its churches and missions would have felt much harsher. Even people who were irregular in attendance often kept some thread tied to these places. A baby's baptism, a marriage, a burial, a holiday mass, a seasonal observance. Ritual has a way of pulling people back. The walk to worship carries its own atmosphere. The street is still noisy, but people are dressed a little better, moving with cleaner faces and more deliberate pace. Women guide children sternly away from puddles. Men in brushed coats try not to look as tired as they are. Bells may ring through the quarter, their sound bouncing off brick and smoke. If you enter a Catholic church, the air changes at once. Wax, incense, wet wool drying in warmth, the murmur of prayers, the scrape of benches, the glimmer of candles against statues and polished metal. For a family living in close, shabby rooms, such spaces can feel like another kind of architecture entirely. High, ordered, solemn, scented. A place where the soul is given more ceiling. Jewish families, too, carried familiar observances into the city, shaping the week and the year through food, prayer, and household customs that survived the crossing. Sabbath preparations, blessing over bread, candles, and the measured pause from ordinary labour all gave sacred structure to lives otherwise ruled by employers and landlords. Protestant immigrant households had their own devotions, hymn singing, Bible reading, and Sabbath expectations. Each tradition marked time differently, yet all offered a counterweight to the city's relentless commerce. New York wanted every day to be business, Faith answered. Not today, or at least not entirely. Historians still debate how fully immigrant observance changed in America within the first generation. Some argue urban life eroded old customs quickly. Others point out how fiercely ritual can survive when identity feels threatened. In truth, many families seem to have done both at once. They adapted and preserved, improvised and remembered. A feast is shortened, a fast is bent by work, a prayer remains, a holy picture is pinned to the wall, a processional custom vanishes, a lullaby stays. Migration edits tradition without always destroying it. Inside the tenement, faith often becomes visible in small objects, a crucifix above the bed, a saint's print tucked near the stove, a rosary hanging from a nail, a worn prayer book wrapped in cloth, a Sabbath candlestick carefully polished, though the room around it resists every notion of polish. These objects can seem almost defiant against the poverty of the surroundings. A holy image on a stained wall says something important. Not that the family is free from hardship. Quite the opposite. It says hardship does not own the entire room. Songs matter too. You hear them in half voice while dough is kneaded, while a baby is rocked, while shirts are folded, while neighbours gather on an evening less hurried than most. Some songs are hymns, some are ballads from the old country, softened by distance and repetition. Some are drinking songs sung more politely in mixed company. Some are lullabies so old nobody remembers who first carried them across which border. The sound of them in a tenement is tender and slightly sad. The walls are thin, so songs travel. One family's memory becomes another family's background music. Children learn customs through repetition before explanation. They know a certain meal appears on a certain day. They know candles are lit, or prayers said, or work stopped, or church attended, or a ribbon tied, or a name honoured, or a fast observed until everyone becomes unusually interested in the clock. They may not know the deeper theology yet. They know the pattern. Pattern matters. In a world full of uncertainty, customs teach children that some things still arrive when expected. One delightful detail from immigrant neighbourhoods is how festivals could spill beyond the household into the street itself. A wedding, christening, Saint's Day, or national celebration might involve extra visitors, music from open windows, borrowed chairs, and more laughter than the building usually contains on a work night. The room fills, then the hallway fills, then somebody ends up on the stoop with a plate because architecture has surrendered. Respectable people may disapprove. Everyone else follows the sound of celebration. Food during these times takes on its fullest emotional weight. A roast, A pie, a sweet bun, dumplings, pancakes, sausages, pickled things, a carefully brewed coffee, beer or wine if afforded. All of it announces abundance even when abundance is relative. A holiday table in a tenement is still a tenement table. The plates may not match, the table may wobble, chairs may be borrowed, children may have been scrubbed into temporary obedience, but the effect is real. The room feels fuller, warmer, and briefly less conquered by want. Women often act as keepers of these customs. Though men insist on their own authority in prayer to feast and family identity, a mother may know exactly how long dough must rise, how to braid a bread properly, how to prepare a dish her own mother taught her, how to fold a cloth for a holiday meal, or which prayer is said before sleep on a special night. Grandmothers, when present, can become formidable guardians of correctness. The younger generation may try shortcuts. The older generation notices instantly. Nothing sharpens an elderly immigrant woman's attention quite like a badly executed tradition. At the same time, young people begin to alter the mood of these observances. Children bring home English words. Teenagers absorb American fashions, tunes, jokes, and habits from the street. A son may grumble about old customs while still expecting the special holiday supper. A daughter may wear her hair a little differently than her mother prefers. There is tension here, gentle or fierce depending on the family. What should be kept? What may be changed? What counts as progress? What feels like betrayal? The tenement is not only a place where old worlds survive, it is also where they start becoming something else. Neighbours join in this process. Families share feast foods across ethnic lines when curiosity or kindness outweighs suspicion. A woman sends a plate next door with instructions on how it ought to be eaten. Children either gift first with doubt, then enthusiasm. Someone asks for the recipe. Someone else politely pretends to ask for the recipe while actually seeking gossip. Buildings become accidental classrooms in one another's customs. The smell under a door becomes the start of an education. There are also household beliefs that live in the space between faith and superstition. A charm tucked in a drawer, garlic or herbs hung for protection, the sign of the cross made quickly over a sleeping baby, a fear of praising a child too strongly lest envy or bad luck notice, a muttered phrase against the evil eye. These practices do not vanish just because the family now lives on a New York block full of carts and brick dust. If anything, the uncertainty of city life can make them feel newly necessary. Logic and fear have always been on speaking terms. The evening atmosphere during these observances can feel especially rich. Candlelight warms the walls, steam clouds the little window, a prayer rises, low and familiar. Someone clears a throat before singing. The table holds better food than usual. The smell of spice and yeast mingles with lamp smoke and the faint city dirt that nothing ever quite defeats. A child swings tired legs under the chair. A grandmother tells a story for the 5th time and somehow still wins silence. Outside, wheels still clatter and a drunk still argues somewhere in the street. But inside the room, another order has briefly been established. These customs also preserve dignity in a quieter way. Poverty can be shapeless. It strips choice, compresses time, and makes one day resemble another until memory turns grey. Ritual interrupts that flattening. It says this day is not like other days. This bread is blessed. This name is honoured. This song belongs to us. This mourning has form. This joy has inherited steps. Families who cannot command much in the world can still command a ceremony, however modest. Some customs revolve around life passages, births, baptisms, first communions, confirmations, marriages, funerals. The tenement witnesses them all. New babies are welcomed with prayers and practical advice in equal measure. Weddings may be small, festive, and a little cramped, which is to say perfectly suited to the building. Death rituals are especially powerful. A family that cannot afford many luxuries may still insist on proper mourning forms, proper prayers, proper respect for the dead. Neighbours gather and candles burn. Food arrives. Grief is shared because there is simply no room to contain it privately. One scholarly uncertainty lingers over how much these traditions comforted people, versus burdening them with expectations they could scarcely afford. A feast requires extra money. Proper mourning requires time and expense. Respectability demands clothing and effort. Historians debate whether ritual in poor communities acted mostly as support or as pressure. The answer is likely both. Customs can console and compel at once, yet from inside the tenement room, one imagines most families would still cling to them. A burden tied to meaning often feels lighter than emptiness. Even ordinary evenings can carry traces of the old world. A father recites a prayer his own father taught him. A mother hums a tune from childhood while stirring the pot. Children hear stories about saints, village fools, kings, rebels, famine years, miracles, wolves, soldiers, or impossible relatives whose memory improves every time it is retold. Accent survives in these stories. Humour survives too. Not every remembrance is solemn. Some are ridiculous. Thank heaven. A family cannot live on grief and piety alone. By the time the candles burn low and the dishes are stacked or rinsed, the room feels both humble and strangely complete. The walls have not widened, the rent has not vanished, tomorrow's labour waits patiently. Yet for a few hours the tenement has contained not just survival, but inheritance, not just supper, but meaning. The children have learned again who they are supposed to be, even if the city will begin arguing otherwise at first light. When you lie down that night, the air still carries a trace of spice, wax, warm bread, or incense depending on the day and the family. Voices in nearby rooms settle from song or prayer into tired murmurs. The neighbourhood grows quieter without becoming silent, and in the close darkness of the apartment, with holy pictures faint on the wall and the last candle scent lingering, you understand how immigrant families kept more than bodies alive in these tenements. They kept memory in practice. They turned custom into shelter, and in doing so made the city, for a little while, less foreign. Fear lives close in a tenement, not the grand fear of battlefields or storms at sea, though some families have known those too. This is the smaller, more exhausting kind, the fear that waits under ordinary life and never fully goes home. In New York in 1860, immigrant families in crowded tenements wake, cook, work, and sleep beside dangers so common they almost begin to look like furniture. Illness, fire, accident, and sudden loss do not arrive as shocking interruptions. They hover at the edge of each day, asking only for an opening. You feel this first in the bodies listening. A child coughs in the night, and everyone notices. A baby wakes hot against the blanket, and a mother's hand lingers on the forehead longer than before. A man comes home pale after work, moving stiffly, and the room's mood shifts without anyone naming it. In close quarters, sickness has no private entrance. It enters one body and immediately becomes a household event. The room is too small for denial. A flushed face, a damp pillow, a bowl left untouched. These things alter the air more quickly than the weather. The tenement itself does little to help. The window lets in weak light and uncertain air. The walls trap heat in summer and drafts in winter. Water must be carried. Waste must be endured. Beds are shared. Towels reused. Dishes rinsed with care, but not always abundance. Children play in streets where mud and refuse keep unpleasant company. Adults come home from labour worn down, underfed, and too tired to resist what stronger bodies might shake off. Poverty does not create every illness, but it gives illness a comfortable chair and invites it to stay longer. Fevers are especially frightening because they transform a room so quickly. A child lively in the morning may grow still by dusk. The skin burns, the eyes shine strangely, the breath changes its rhythm. Cloths are soaked and laid across the brow. Water is coaxed into reluctant mouths. The mother listens for every swallow. The father, if present, grows awkward with worry and tries to be useful without getting in the way. Siblings are hushed. They're not hushed enough. Then hushed again. The room grows warm with steam, bodies, and anxiety. Outside, carts still rattle and vendors still call, which somehow feels rude. Doctors are not always close, affordable, or trusted. Many families rely first on home remedies, neighbourly advice, and the old practical wisdom carried across the ocean. Onion poultices, herb teas, mustard plasters, vinegar cloths, broth, prayer, and rest if rest can be forced upon the room. Some remedies help because warmth, hydration, and time are not foolish things. Others belong more to hope than medicine. Historians still argue over how poor urban families balance traditional cures, professional medicine, and charitable dispensaries in this period, because access varied, and belief did too. But one fact is plain enough. Most sickness was managed first at home, under pressure, with limited tools. Children are especially vulnerable, and everyone knows it even if no one says it aloud at supper. Infancy in this world is a precarious business. Small bodies meet bad air, weak diets, summer heat, winter cold, and diseases that pass quickly through crowded neighborhoods. A baby who will not feed can cast a shadow across an entire building. Women share advice from room to room. Try this tea, keep her warm, open the window a little, not too much, rub the chest, pray to this saint, send for that woman downstairs who knows about babies. Hope and fear circulate together. Cholera still haunts the city's memory by 1860. Earlier outbreaks left deep marks on how New Yorkers understood crowded districts, filth, and danger. Even when cholera is not actively raging, its ghost lingers in every conversation about foul water and bad sanitation. Other illnesses remain common companions: typhoid, measles, whooping cough, influenza, consumption, and the endless parade of stomach troubles and chest complaints all stalk the poor more confidently than the rich. The body becomes a map of risks. A cough means one thing in a healthy young labourer, and something darker in a seamstress already too thin: consumption. What later generations call tuberculosis carries a particularly cruel reputation. It moves slowly enough to drain a family as thoroughly as a fire. The cough lingers, the appetite slips, strength goes out of the limbs, work becomes harder, then impossible. In a tenement, a long illness is not only a sorrow, it is an economic collapse unfolding by inches. The sick person needs care. The room needs cleaning. Income shrinks. Boarders may be taken in or lost. Children are drawn into more work. Hope becomes stubborn simply because arithmetic has become frightening. A strange detail from 19th century urban life is how closely people watched one another for signs of health and decay. A neighbour leaning over the stair rail might identify illness by colour alone: too pale, too red, too quiet, too sharp around the face. Buildings became unwilling observatories. One family notices another boiling linens, keeping curtains drawn, sending a child for a priest, or carrying broth more often than usual. News spreads softly. The woman in the rear room is down with fever. The cobbler's daughter has the rash. The baby on the top floor has been crying all night. In the tenement, sickness is rarely solitary. Then there is fire. The fear of fire lives in the stove, in the lamp, in the candle stub, in the ash bucket, in the wood stairs, in the cheap partitions, in the laundry hung too near heat, in the habit of falling asleep exhausted while a flame still glows somewhere. These buildings are crowded with fuel and carelessness, though carelessness is often only fatigue by another name. Rooms contain bedding, straw, cloth, paper, wood, crates, curtains, scraps, and lives arranged too tightly to move quickly in panic. A single spark can become an argument with fate. You know the smells of ordinary heat: coal smoke, lamp oil, warm iron, charred crust at the bottom of a pot. But when something goes wrong, the smell changes fast. It sharpens. Burnt cloth, singed hair, hot wood. The sudden bitter bite that makes everyone look up at once. A shout from the hall, feet thundering, a baby screaming because adults are no longer pretending calm. Buckets clatter, doors fly open. Someone yells for water. Someone else yells a prayer. In the narrow geography of a tenement, confusion moves almost as quickly as flame. Most fires do not become legendary disasters. Many are smaller and therefore more frequent in memory. A pan flares. Bedding catches from a careless candle. A child upsets a lamp. An ash bucket set too near wood does what ash buckets sometimes do when underestimated. Smoke fills a room before anyone understands where it started. In a close apartment, even a minor blaze can do serious damage. It blackens walls, ruins bedding, scorches keepsakes, fills lungs, frightens children so badly they wake crying for nights afterward. The building remembers in stains and smells. Families develop habits against this threat. Check the lamp, bank the fire, keep the bucket ready, warn the children. Do not leave the candle where cloth can reach it. Yet habit fails under exhaustion. A mother dozing over mending, a father coming home late and careless with a pipe, a boarder too weary to think clearly, a child curious about flame in the universal way children have always been. Fire is patient. It waits for one tired mistake. Accidents of other kinds lurk everywhere too. The steep stairs with weak light, the broken board in the hallway, the loose railing, the window a child should not lean from, the street where wagons pass faster than caution, the docks, workshops, and construction sites where men risk crushed hands, torn backs, and sudden falls. An injury does not need to kill to devastate. A twisted ankle can keep a labourer from work for days. A cut can turn ugly. A damaged hand can ruin a seamstress's speed or a cobbler's precision. The poor live close enough to the edge that even non-fatal accidents cast long shadows. You watch children on the stairs and understand why mothers call after them so sharply. The wood is worn smooth in the middle, damp on rainy days, and dim at all hours except perhaps noon. Little boots slip, bare feet hurry, arms full of water or bread make balance worse. An ordinary tumble can raise bruises, split lips, or break bones. The building offers no soft landings. Even the walls seem hard with experience. The street beyond the tenement has dangers of its own. Horses kick, wheels crush, crowds swallow, fights break out, weather turns foul. A child can fall into a gutter, a labourer can be struck while unloading, an old woman can slip in winter filth and not rise easily. New York keeps moving regardless. There is no kindly pause while a family catches its breath. That indifference may be the city's coldest habit, yet fear does not remain pure fear for long. It becomes routine, and routine makes room for skill. Women learn to read coughs, clean wounds, cool fevers, and stay alert for smoke. Men learn where accidents happen most often on the job, and how to protect themselves as best they can. Children are drilled in practical caution through repeated warnings that become family music. Do not touch that. Step away. Mind the cart. Hold the rail. Stay where I can see you. Some obey. Some are human. One scholarly uncertainty concerns how much danger poor families perceived as avoidable, and how much they simply accepted as the ordinary price of urban life. Reformers later described tenements in ways that emphasize scandal and preventable misery. Residents themselves may have framed some risks differently, seeing them as part of the harsh world rather than a public problem with solutions. Still, nobody needed a reform pamphlet to know a smoky hallway, a rotten step, or a shared sickbed with bad arrangements. Experience was already educating them. Death visits these buildings often enough that mourning customs become practical knowledge. A priest or minister is sent for. Neighbours gather. Candles are lit if there are candles to spare. Women move quietly with cloths, food, and instructions. Children are hushed and then inevitably stare. The dead are not abstract in tenement life. They were just here yesterday borrowing a pan, coughing on the stairs, scolding a child, singing in the yard. A room changes tone forever after a death, even when new tenants eventually replace the silence. The fear of losing work can feel almost as sharp as fear of illness or flame. A man injured, a mother too sick to sew, a child unable to run errands. All of it threatens the household's balance. Rent waits for no fever. Food prices do not bow to grief. This is why sickness frightens families economically as much as physically. A body laid low is also a wage interrupted, a routine broken, a set of tasks reassigned. Compassion and calculation must occupy the same room, and neither leaves much space for rest. At twilight the building can feel especially vulnerable. Lamps are lit, fires are fed, supper is prepared in room after room, shadows lengthen in the halls, fatigue settles on every face, making mistakes more likely. You smell onions frying, soap drying on washed cloth, stale damp in the corners, and under it all the watchful scent of smoke from many stoves and lamps. Babies cry, men cough, children argue sleepily. The tenement seems crowded not only with people but with chances for things to go wrong. And yet people keep one another alive here more often than not. A neighbour smells smoke first and pounds on a door. A woman runs for the priest. A man carries water up the stairs. Another fetches the doctor. Children are sent on urgent errands and run as if history itself were behind them. Broth appears for the sick. Advice appears whether requested or not. Women sit up with fevered children in rooms not their own. Men help carry an injured labourer inside. The building that spreads danger also spreads response. That is one of the cruel little paradoxes of crowded life. The same closeness that helps disease travel also lets alarm travel just as fast. When night finally settles and the room grows dim, fear does not disappear, it simply lies down beside you. You hear a cough through the wall and wonder whether it sounds worse than yesterday. You smell the last breath of the stove and hope it stays where it belongs. You listen for the easy breathing of children. You notice how hot or cool the baby feels. Outside, a cart passes late, then another. Somewhere a dog barks. Somewhere someone is still awake with the sick. The city does not stop because danger exists. It merely includes danger among its ordinary noises. You close your eyes in that close room, with the lamp out, the bucket nearby, the window dark, and your family gathered as near as space allows. In a tenement, courage rarely looks heroic. It looks like checking a child's forehead again. It looks like keeping a candle trimmed. It looks like getting up when someone calls in the hall. It looks like enduring the fact that life is fragile here, and still preparing for morning. After enough days in the tenement, endurance stops looking dramatic. It does not arrive with speeches, banners, or swelling music. It settles in quietly, like dust on the windowsill or soot in the cracks of the stove. In New York in 1860, immigrant families living in tenements do not survive by feeling heroic every morning. That would be exhausting, and they're already exhausted. They survive by waking again, by doing what the day requires, by adjusting, bargaining, patching, carrying, praying, laughing at ridiculous things, and refusing to let the city decide that hardship is the same thing as worthlessness. You feel this most clearly at night. The room is dim, the bedding laid out, the children breathing in uneven little rhythms, and the noises of the building settling into their familiar order. A cough below, a footstep overhead, the click of a late spoon against a bowl. Somewhere in the hallway, a board complains under the weight of one last neighbour heading to bed. Outside, the city has not gone quiet exactly. Wheels still pass now and then. A distant voice rises, blurs, fades. But inside the room there is a kind of tired peace. And in that peace you understand that the family's greatest skill has become continuation. Continuation is not glamorous. It is deeply important. By now the tenement room holds evidence of your life not as a guest, but as a resident. The table bears scratches made by your meals, your mending, your cups set down too quickly. The wall has a nail in the right place because you put it there. The stove has its habits, the window its tricks, the floor its dangerous board that everyone now avoids without thinking. Children know where to find the bread knife, where the basin is kept, how to step around sleeping bodies in the dark. Even the room's smells have become legible. This morning's coal, last night's soup, soap drying on cloth, damp wool after rain. Home in a tenement is not comfort. It is familiarity strong enough to become a shelter of its own. There is dignity in that, though outsiders do not always see it. Reformers, journalists, charitable visitors, and respectable citizens may glance into poor immigrant housing and notice only crowding, filth, danger, and noise. They are not wrong to notice those things. Yet if they stop there, they miss what families themselves are building inside those conditions. Order where they can make it, courtesy where they can afford it, rituals, decency, humour, a child's washed face, a father's cap removed at supper, a mother's apron changed before Sunday, bread divided fairly, grief observed properly, a loan repaid when possible, pride maintained in patched clothing and straight backs. That pride can be stubborn enough to look almost funny. A man whose boots admit rain may still polish them before church. A woman whose room is scarcely larger than a pantry may still be offended if a visitor notices dust before noticing the clean children. A grandmother may insist on a proper table arrangement for a feast, even if 2 guests must eat with plates balanced on their knees. There is a gentle comedy in this, and also something admirable. Human beings love ceremony even when the furniture mocks them. Humour matters more than people often admit. In cramped immigrant households, jokes are not decoration, they're equipment. Someone laughs at the leaky roof. Someone imitates the landlord's face. Someone claims the stew is so thin it ought to wear boots and go to work on its own. Children giggle over a neighbour's pompous hat. A mother rolls her eyes at the state of the washing line as if it were a personal enemy. These jokes do not solve anything, but they keep bitterness from hardening too completely. A room where nobody laughs is a room in danger of sinking. You see endurance also in the ways families imagine a future, however cautiously. Savings hidden in a box. A child sent to school when possible because letters may open doors, muscle cannot. A dream of better rooms on a cleaner street. A hope that one son might enter a trade. One daughter marry kindly. One family member move uptown. One generation breathe easier than the last. Historians still argue over how realistic such upward hopes were for families starting at the bottom of the tenement world in 1860. Some did rise gradually, others remained trapped by wages, illness, accidents, widowhood, and prejudice. But hope does not require statistical certainty. It only requires enough space in the mind to picture another arrangement of life. The city itself encourages this kind of dangerous optimism. New York is harsh, but it is also restless. Streets expand, jobs shift, new buildings go up, neighbourhoods change tone, ships arrive carrying more strangers and rumours, markets open, railways connect, factories grow. The place never seems finished, which means people can imagine entering its future somehow. Even those living in dark rooms can feel that unfinished quality in the air. The city is being made, and perhaps there is still a corner of it where your children will fit more comfortably than you do. At the same time, endurance in the tenement is deeply communal. Families are not lone heroic units battling the universe in isolation. They are tied to relatives, neighbours, countrymen, church circles, employers, shopkeepers, and the half-formal networks of help that pass through crowded neighbourhoods. A cousin hears of a job, a neighbour watches the baby, a parish arranges aid, a widow takes in another family's child for an afternoon. A boarder contributes rent. A shopkeeper extends small credit because he knows exactly how these weeks go. Poor communities often survive through exchanges too modest to look impressive from a distance. Yet take them away, and the whole structure wobbles. One curious detail about immigrant resilience is how quickly families could become sources of guidance for newer arrivals. People who had once stepped into the city confused and frightened were soon the ones giving directions, translating prices, explaining neighbourhoods, warning against cheats, and offering a corner of floor for one night too many. Hardship did not make them generous automatically. Nothing does. But shared experience created a rough etiquette of assistance. Having been lost yesterday, you knew what a mapless face looked like today. The children, of course, embody endurance most vividly because they change before your eyes. They arrive small, uncertain, sometimes frightened by the city's noise, and then adapt with alarming speed. They learn stairways, corners, voices, prices, games, and dangers. Their English improves. Their errands become more reliable. Their opinions become more American, which can be useful and irritating in equal measure. They carry forward pieces of the old country and pieces of New York without asking permission from either. Parents may worry about what is being lost, but there is also pride in seeing a child navigate the city more confidently than the adults once could. That generational shift gives tenement life some of its deepest poignancy. Adults often live with one foot in memory and one in necessity. Children more readily occupy the new place, even if they still kneel for old prayers and eat old dishes. A son may speak English with ease to employers and old language with hesitation at home. A daughter may copy city fashions with threadbare means while still observing family devotions. Identity becomes layered rather than replaced. The tenement is one of the places where this layering happens most intensely, because everything is so close together. Old customs on the shelf, new slang in the stairwell, American streets under old boots. Season after season, the apartment trains everyone in endurance through weather alone. Summer turns the room heavy, sticky, and close. Air barely moves. Flies appear with insulting confidence. Children sleep sprawled and fretful. Winter tightens everything. Window glass chills the fingers. Floors bite through thin socks. Breath fogs near the pane. Coal must be counted. Blankets must stretch. Bodies gather near the stove not from sentiment but engineering. Spring brings mud. Autumn brings the smell of damp leaves mixed with city soot, a combination almost poetic until you remember the rent still waits. Every season has its labour, its smells, and its minor humiliations. The family learns them all and continues anyway. There is also moral endurance, if that phrase may be allowed in a room full of laundry and potato peels. Living in crowding uncertainty and temptation requires constant small choices, whether to keep a promise, whether to repay a borrowed coin, whether to drink wages away, whether to care for a sick neighbour, whether to send the child to school or to sell papers, whether to cut corners on decency when decency is expensive. Families do not always choose nobly. They are human, tired, and under pressure. But the fact that these choices remain alive in the room matters. Poverty does not cancel ethics. It only makes them more exhausting. Women often bear the heaviest share of this moral and practical continuity. They remember birthdays, feast days, debts, grudges, remedies, recipes, rent dates, and which child lies most convincingly. Men carry burdens too, and harsh ones, but women often serve as the household's memory itself, the keepers of routine under conditions designed to break routine apart. A room continues because someone notices what is missing before supper, what must be washed before Sunday, what has to be saved from the pawn shop, and what story a frightened child needs to hear before sleep. History has a habit of praising large institutions while overlooking the woman who kept 6 lives threaded together in one dim room. An old mistake, a very old one, and still, men in these families are not simply labouring shadows at the door. They bring stories from the docks, jokes from the street, political arguments from taverns and corners, songs from home, skills from old trades, and a sense, however fragile, of protection. A father teaching a son to mend something, carve something, carry himself properly, or keep silent when silence is wiser. This too belongs to endurance. So does the softer side men sometimes reveal only in crowded darkness, smoothing a blanket over a sleeping child when nobody is meant to notice. Religion continues to help shape this endurance, though not always in neat saintly ways. Faith offers language for suffering, gratitude for small mercies, and a framework in which struggle is not meaningless. It also offers community, as churches and synagogues bind together newcomers who might otherwise dissolve into the city. Yet religion in the tenement is practical as well as spiritual. It blesses bread, buries the dead, marks births, and gives weary people somewhere to take grief that the apartment cannot contain. A prayer said before sleep in a crowded room may be part devotion, part habit, part fear, and part gratitude that all are still breathing tonight. One scholarly uncertainty remains around how families themselves narrated their own lives inside these conditions. Reformers later described them one way, novelists another, journalists another. But how did a mother in 1860 explain her tenement existence to herself after the children slept? As sacrifice, as progress, as humiliation, as temporary necessity, as ordinary life. Historians can guess from letters, memoirs, parish records, and public testimony, but not perfectly. Perhaps that is fitting. Private endurance rarely leaves grand speeches behind. It leaves worn objects, family stories, and descendants who only partly know what was required. There are objects in the room now that carry this whole quiet history. The patched blanket, the cooking pot blackened by countless suppers, the prayer book with softened edges, the shoe mended twice, the cracked cup nobody discards because it belonged to someone dear, the hidden coins, the child's slate, the market basket, the shawl smelling faintly of smoke and soap. None of these things are valuable in a showroom sense. In the tenement, they are a civilization. As the hour grows late, the building sinks deeper into its night sounds. Someone below says a final goodnight in a language your children answer differently than you once did. A baby gives one last protesting cry. Water drips somewhere in the distance. A wagon passes, then no other for a while. The air in the room is close, carrying wool, ash, tired bodies, and the little sweetness of sleep beginning. You lie there on the familiar boards and think perhaps not in grand words, but in the simple measure of the day, all fed. Rent not yet, work tomorrow maybe, child's cough less bad, bread enough for morning, the family remains. That may be the deepest truth of tenement endurance in 1860. Families did not wait for perfect conditions before living meaningful lives. They made meaning in cramped rooms, through routine, labour, custom, humour, and the stubborn habit of caring for one another in circumstances that offered every excuse not to. Their dignity was not given by the city. They assembled it themselves, piece by piece, like a patched garment turned and returned until it could still be worn another season. And now the room grows softer. The last voices fade behind walls. The stove gives out its final little warmth. The darkness gathers kindly around the table. The hanging clothes, the shoes near the door, the sleeping children, the folded apron, the hidden coins, the loaf wrapped for morning. Above the city, the night spreads over rooftops, chimneys, church spires, and the harbour where ships still rock in black water. Somewhere far off, beyond the brick and smoke and narrow courts, the river keeps moving in silence, and the air above it is cooler, cleaner, less burdened by human breath. You do not need to stand there to imagine it. So you let the room become quiet around you. You let the day's noise loosen its grip. The stairwell rests. The yard sleeps. The hallway keeps its secrets until dawn. In the dark, your family's breathing joins the many other breaths inside the building, each one carrying fatigue, memory, and a little hope into the night. There were hard days here, and fearful ones, and weary ones beyond counting. There was also bread shared, laughter found, songs remembered, children raised, neighbours trusted, clothes mended, candles lit, and mornings faced when no one felt ready. That is no small thing. It is a whole human life, held together in narrow space. Now the lamplight is gone in your mind, the walls drift back, the city's edges soften. The bed is plain, but it holds you. The room is closer, but it keeps you. The night is long, but it asks nothing now. You breathe in the fading scents of wood, cloth, and cooled ashes. You feel the tiredness settle gently through your limbs. You hear only distant wheels, then less than that, above the roofs. The sky opens where no landlord can divide it. Below, the tenement sleeps in layers of silence and soft murmur, and within that layer dark, your family rests at last.